That little piece of paper trembled in Clara Hawthorne's hands. The words were sharp and few. Send her back. Too stubborn. But that Wyoming wind howling outside didn't chill her. It sparked a fire. She hadn't come all this way just to turn tail and run home. Y'all stick with this story and let me know what town you're in. 'Cause what Clara did next was something else entirely. The matchmaking office felt like a place where dreams went to die. Mrs. Abigail Fletcher, the town's marriage broker, looked through her letters. She shuffled them like a dealer with a deck of losing cards. Well now, Mrs. Fletcher said, sounding mighty pleased with herself. I told you Mr. Henderson wanted a woman with a quieter spirit. Quieter, Clara thought, meant a woman who'd just disappear. She'd watched her own mother do that sad disappearing act for years. Her mother just faded away until nobody in Boston even noticed. He sent me back like a broken tool, Clara said, her voice steady. I only lasted 3 days because I had opinions on his irrigation. Mrs. Fletcher's eyebrows shot up. You talk business with him? His plan was wasteful. I just offered a better idea, Clara said. The matchmaker took off her glasses, polishing them real slow. Miss Hawthorne, that man has worked this land for 15 years. A little bit of quiet respect might have served you better. Clara stood up straight. I didn't travel 1,800 miles to be quiet. If these men want a doll, they should just order one from a catalog. Outside the window, the town of Greystone looked rough and unfinished. The muddy street and worn-out buildings were a far cry from home. But this place was honest, not like those stuffy Boston parties. It was a tough place, and Clara had only $17 to her name. I know you're upset, Mrs. Fletcher said, a little softer now. But the men out here, they're set in their ways and want to help her. They are not looking for someone who will add complications. Let me speak plainly, Miss Hawthorne. Your education and all those opinions are not what men are looking for in a wife out here. Clara watched a tough woman outside, a fighter, not a victim, and asked quietly, what are my options? After a long silence where Mrs. Fletcher sized her up, the woman finally said, you have one. She pulled a letter from a hidden spot in her desk saying, I was not planning on showing you this one. It was from a man named Luke Carver, who had already seen 3 different mail-order brides run right off. The last one, Lord help her, walked 12 miles in a snowstorm to escape. Clara asked, what did he do to them? Nothing, Mrs. Fletcher said. He is just half wild, and the awful silence of his isolated ranch drives women mad. His letter was brutally honest, promising hard work and protection, but warning her not to try and change him. His directness appealed to Clara. He just sounds lonely. But Mrs. Fletcher insisted he was impossible. A wolf. Or, Clara countered, he is just someone who does not pretend, unlike every other man I have ever met. But it seemed to have been hidden on purpose. I wasn't fixing to show you this one. Well, why not? Because Luke Carver ain't like the other men who write in. Mrs. Fletcher laid the letter down like it was a snake. He's had 3 mail-order brides, 3 of them. The first one bolted back east after just 2 months. The last one, bless her heart, walked 12 miles to town in a blizzard to get away from his ranch. Clara found herself leaning in, mighty curious. What in the world did he do to them? That's the thing. Nothing at all. Mrs. Fletcher nudged the letter toward her. He wasn't mean to them. He's just different. Luke Carver is half wild, more comfortable with coyotes than with people, I reckon. They say his ranch is so far out, the quiet is enough to drive a woman plumb crazy. Clara picked up the letter. The man's handwriting was neat, like he took great care with his words. It read, I need a wife for this ranch. The work is hard and the winters are tough. I'm not a man of many words, but I'll provide for you, protect you, and I'll never raise my hand to you. If you can handle being alone and doing honest work, Cedar Creek Ranch is a good place. But if you need parties and a soft life, you best look somewhere else. Don't come here aiming to change me. Clara read it over 2, then 3 times. The man's straight-shooting honesty struck a chord deep inside her. She looked up and said softly, he sounds awful lonely. He's impossible, Mrs. Fletcher declared. The other women called him the wolf. Said he'd go days without a word and disappear into the mountains, leaving them all alone. They said it was like living with a ghost out there. Or maybe, Clara thought, It's like living with someone who doesn't put on a false front. All the men I've ever known were always performing, putting on some kind of show. Those other fellows just put on a show, Clara said, tapping the letter. This here is honest, and it is the only option I am considering. Mrs. Fletcher mentioned Boston, but Clara's firm no made the old matchmaker soften, seeing a woman who had made her own hard choices. My mother died trying to be what everyone needed, Clara explained. I will not be trapped in that same life. There is nothing for me back there. Mrs. Fletcher laid it out plain. The ranch is 40 miles out, the nearest neighbor 8. Luke Carver is not cruel, but he sure is not soft. I need a place to breathe, to be useful, not just pretty, Claire interrupted. I have been alone my whole life. This kind of quiet sounds just fine. The older woman looked her over from the city dress to the soft hands, and I reckon she could not tell if it was grit or foolishness in Clara's eyes. He will not change for you. Others have tried, Mrs. Fletcher warned. Luke is exactly what that letter says he is. Good, Clara replied simply. I am tired of men full of fancy promises and disappointment. With him, I know what I am getting. Mrs. Fletcher gave a short, sharp laugh. Honey, you do not know anything. You are betting your whole future on 9 sentences from a man they call the Wolf. But Clara remembered Boston and how she was just an ornament there. When do I leave? She asked, ready for whatever came next. The whole office got quiet for a spell. Cedar Creek Ranch is a good 40 miles from here. Mrs. Fletcher finally broke the silence. His nearest neighbor is 8 miles off. He only comes to town 4 or 5 times a year. He's not a cruel man, but he surely ain't a soft one. If you're looking for romance, I need a place where I can breathe, Clara cut in. I need work that matters. I'm tired of being an ornament. She picked up the letter again. If this man wants honesty, well, I can give him that. And if he needs someone who won't break from being alone, well, I've been alone in crowded rooms my entire life. Mrs. Fletcher just sat there, studying her for a long moment. Clara knew what she saw, a city girl in a fancy dress that was already looking worn from the road. She saw dark hair pinned up Boston style and soft hands that had never done a lick of real work. Some might call that grit, others call it foolishness. That man is not going to change, Mrs. Fletcher warned. Others have tried. Tried. They tried to get him to talk, to be social, to be something different. It is no use. Luke Carver is just what his letter says he is. Says, not a bit more, not a bit less. Good, Clara said plainly. I am plumb tired of men who promise the world and give you nothing but grief. Disappointment. At least with a man like Mr. Carver, I know what I am walking into. Do you now? Mrs. Fletcher's laugh was a sharp little bark. And sharp. Honey, you do not know the first thing about it. Not really. You are gambling your whole life on 9 short sentences. Sentences from a man folks just call Wolf. Clara's mind went back to Boston, to her father's study, where he always said her smarts were unattractive, that her intelligence was unbecoming, of the parlor where men would smile nice as you please, but their eyes would go empty when she talked. Over whenever she spoke about anything more substantial than the weather or flowers. Of her mother's funeral and how she stood all alone. She had stood alone because she refused to fake sadness for a marriage that had choked the life out of her mother. When am I headed out? She asked. Mrs. Fletcher let out a long sigh. It was a sound that held 30 years of women making hard choices because of the men who made them. Tough situations. She pulled out a fresh form, sighing like she knew this story by heart. I'll send the telegram today. If Luke agrees, and Lord knows why he would after 3 failures, he will come for you within a week. She started writing, her pen moving fast. You will need real winter supplies, sturdy boots, not that fancy Boston dress. The mercantile can set you up, but it is expensive. How much money do you have? Enough, Clara lied. Mrs. Fletcher's pen stopped. She looked up, and her eyes held something worse than judgment. It was pity. Miss Hawthorne, I have done this long enough to know desperation when I see it. How much? $17. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Mrs. Fletcher whispered, setting down her pen. That will not even get you decent boots. Winter at Cedar Creek Ranch is a different beast. I will manage. With what? Your pride, Mrs. Fletcher was already grabbing a ledger. She was all business, solving a problem she did not want. All right, here's what we will do. The mercantile owner, Sam Chen, owes me a few favors. I will arrange some credit for you, and I mean for the essentials, nothing fancy. You can work it off helping me before Luke gets here. My arthritis makes writing a chore, and I have 3 months of filing that needs doing. Clara's throat felt tight. I cannot. You can, and you will, unless you want to meet your husband with the wrong shoes on, freezing to death. Just think of it as an investment for me. Mrs. Fletcher went back to her form. If you die of exposure in the first week, it looks bad for my business. Through it all, Clara almost smiled. That is very practical of you. I am a practical woman, Miss Hawthorne. And speaking practically, you should know one more thing about Luke Carver. She finished writing. She looked up with a look that was part warning and part respect. The reason his other brides left was not because he was a terrible man. It was because he was an honest one. He told them exactly who he was, never pretended, and they just could not accept it. They all wanted to fix him, save him, turn him into some kind of hero. But you cannot fix what is not broken. Luke Carver is not a project. He is just a man who prefers silence to a lot of chatter. He built a life all by himself and does not apologize for it. Mrs. Fletcher stood up for her coat. If you go out to Cedar Creek thinking you can change him, you will end up just like the others. But if you can accept him for who he is. She paused, her face hard to read. Well, maybe the 5th time is the charm. 5th? You did not think you were the first I have sent his way, did you? There was another one years ago. She only lasted 3 days. Mrs. Fletcher put on her coat. Come on, let us get you to Sam's Mercantile before I change my mind about this whole foolish idea. A long, narrow building that smelled like leather, tobacco, dried goods, and the dust from 1,000 deals. Big barrels were lined up against one wall, chock full of flour, sugar, cornmeal, and beans. Shelves went clear up to the ceiling, piled high with everything from cast iron skillets to those medicine bottles that made promises they could never keep. Sam Chen was standing behind the counter, a solid fella in his 50s with gray hair and eyes that sized Clara up with the same careful way he probably weighed out a pound of nails. Well, another one, Abigail, he said, getting straight to the point. She's for Carver, unless you'd rather she freeze solid and start haunting this place. Mrs. Fletcher pulled her gloves. This girl needs to be outfitted proper. I'll vouch for the cost. Sam's eyebrows shot up. You're vouching for Cedar Creek Ranch? I suppose I'm getting soft in my old age. Blame it on the winter. Mrs. Fletcher turned to Clara. Go on, show him your feet. Clara just blinked. Pardon me? Your feet, those silly little Boston shoes. Show 'em to him. With her cheeks burning up, Clara lifted her skirt just a bit, showing him the kid leather boots that seemed so sensible back in Massachusetts. Now they just looked pitiful against the muddy floorboards of Wyoming. Sam let out a low whistle. Those things won't last a week, Sarah, he hollered toward the back. I need you to come take a look at this. A woman came out from behind a curtain, tall with black hair braided all the way down her back. Her face looked like a mix of Chinese, Mexican, and something else entirely. She took one good look at Clara's boots and just laughed. Boston, I take it, Pa, she asked. Is it that plain to see? Only to anybody with eyes. Sarah Chen moved with an easy grace, like someone who was mighty comfortable in her own skin. She walked a circle around Clara, looking her over like a professional, without a hint of judgment. About 5'4", small build, but you stand up straight. Your hands say you ain't done hard labor, but your fingers tell me you're not scared of work. Seeing ink stains, needle pricks. You a seamstress or maybe a writer? Both, Clara admitted. I kept the books for the house and did mending to pay my way out west. Smart girl, Sarah said, nodding her head. You're going to need that smarts. Come on with me. For the next 2 hours, Clara got measured, looked over, and outfitted so fast it made her head spin. Sarah pulled things from shelves and out of storage with the confidence of a person who had done this 100 times, who knew exactly what it took to keep a woman alive through a Wyoming winter on a ranch all by its lonesome. We'll start with the boots, Sarah declared, kneeling down in front of Clara with a few pairs. These here are lined with rabbit fur. They ain't pretty, but they'll keep your toes from freezing off. Go on, try 'em." Clara slipped out of her Boston boots, feeling shorter right away, more exposed, and pushed her feet into the heavy leather. They were stiff and plain, but built for the job. "Take a walk," Sarah ordered. Clara did as she was told, pacing up and down the length of the store. The boots were heavy and clumsy, nothing at all like the fancy shoes she was used to, but they fit just right, and she could feel the difference straight away. That thick sole, the support around her ankle, and the warmth. "I suppose these will do," she said. "Honey, those boots will save your life," Sarah corrected her. She went over to a shelf and pulled down some thick wool stockings. "You're going to need at least 6 pairs of these. You'll wear 2 pairs at a time when it gets real cold, and you'll wash them one after the other. Keep them dry, because wet feet out here means frostbite, and frostbite means you lose your toes. And losing your toes means you're going to die, because you can't work or run if trouble comes." Sarah's plain talk was a lesson in survival. She began assembling Clara's new life, piece by piece, starting with 3 heavy wool skirts. "You'll wear these till they're nothing but patches," Sarah explained, adding thick petticoats and a canvas work dress for the dirty jobs. She laid out a heavy wool coat, leather gloves, and a warm knit cap that made Clara feel ridiculous. "You'll thank me when the temperature drops below 0, Sarah said flatly. "Pride does not keep you warm." Then she pressed a pocket knife into Clara's hand with real seriousness. "Keep this with you always. Not for protection," Sarah continued, "but for the 1,000 little tasks you will do every single day. Do not lose it." Clara felt its simple weight. Ladies from Boston never carried knives, but here, survival required it. The total came to $43.70, more than twice what Clara had. Her heart just sank. "I will add it to Abigail's account," Sam said quietly. "You can work it off with her." He looked up, his gaze serious. "But the women who make it out here are not looking for romance. They know survival is all that matters." "I am not expecting anything," Clara said honestly. "Expectations have only ever disappointed me." Sarah let out a sharp, approving laugh. "You might just make it, Boston. You have got that look." "What look is that?" Clara asked. "The kind that says you would rather die on your feet than live on your knees." As Sarah wrapped the goods, she spoke of Carver. "He is hard to predict, comes to town, speaks little, and leaves fast. He is a lonely man," she added, "but he has built a fortress around himself that most women cannot get through." "I am not trying to get through anything," Clara stated. "I just need a place to be useful." Sam and Sarah shared a knowing glance. Sam nodded slowly. "That might be exactly what that man needs," he said. "Someone who is just looking to be useful. Are not the ones who go looking for a sweet story or a hero. They are the kind of women who know just plain surviving is the only story that matters. If you are heading to Cedar Creek hoping for more, you had best say so right now." "I am not expecting anything," Clara said truthfully. "Hoping for things has only ever let me down." Sarah let out a short, sharp laugh. Approving sound. "You just might do all right out here, Boston. You have got a certain look about you." "What kind of look?" "The one that says you would rather die standing than live kneeling." Sarah started wrapping her things in brown paper, quick and sure. Carver might take a shine to that, or he might just hate it. Hard to tell with men like him. "Have you ever met him? Once, maybe twice? He comes to town rarely, speaks rarely, and leaves fast." Sarah tied up the first package with a piece of string. "But I will tell you what I noticed. The man is lonely, but he has not admitted it to himself yet. Or maybe he has, and just figures it is easier than the alternative. Either way, he has built walls around himself so high, most women cannot get over them." "I am not trying to get over anything," Clara said. "I just need a place where I can be of some use." Sam and Sarah looked at each other, saying something without a single word passing between them. Then Sam gave a slow nod. "You know, that might be just what he needs," he said quietly. Someone who is Sam had pushed the ledger aside, saying if Carver agreed, he'd arrive within a week. 5 days later, Clara was on the porch, watching the horizon like a hawk. Her new boots were warm, but her heart was pounding with a feeling she refused to name. He would have already sent a telegram back if the answer was no. Mrs. Fletcher said from inside. She came out with 2 cups of coffee. Come on in before you freeze yourself solid. I need to see him coming, Clara said, to make sure my face doesn't show him anything I don't want him to see. And what's that? Mrs. Fletcher asked. Desperation? Hope? Honey, a man like Luke Carver will see right through all that, Mrs. Fletcher said with a kind smile. Honesty is your best bet. Just then, her eyes fixed on something in the distance. Speaking of which, a wagon pulled by 2 strong horses appeared on the far hill. That's him, Mrs. Fletcher said. Clara had maybe 3 minutes to decide what kind of woman she would be when she met this man. He sat tall and easy on the wagon, a broad-shouldered man in a heavy sheepskin coat. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but she could see a dark, trim beard. His hands on the reins were large and scarred, the hands of a man who worked hard every single day. He didn't hurry, just kept a steady, sure pace coming right toward her. Of the things that would just give him power over me. Mrs. Fletcher gave her a smile that was not mean, just wise. Miss Hawthorne, if you think you can hide what is in your heart from Luke Carver, you are only fooling yourself. He may be more at home with animals than people, but that man is not stupid. He is going to see right through you, feeling what you are feeling, whether you like it or not. Then I suppose I will have to feel nothing at all. Well, that is one way to go. Honesty is another. The very thing you said you liked about his letter. But before Clara could answer, Mrs. Fletcher stood up a little straighter, her gaze focusing on something over Clara's shoulder. Well, speak of the devil. Clara turned around. A wagon was coming over the top of a far hill, pulled by 2 strong horses, their breath making white clouds in the chilly air. Even from way out there, she could make out the driver. See the driver, a tall man in dark clothes, and he sat in a way that said he was used to being alone and on the road, in travel. That will be him, Mrs. Fletcher said, though she did not need to. Clara felt her own fingers squeezed together tightly. Coffee cup. She had about 3 minutes before Luke Carver showed up, 3 minutes to figure out who she was going to be. As the wagon got closer, Clara could see things clearer. The horses were well fed and the wagon was sturdy. The man, Luke Carver, sat there like he owned the road. He was a bigger fella than she'd pictured, with broad shoulders under a sheepskin coat. A wide-brimmed hat hid his face, but she saw a trimmed, dark beard. His hands on the reins were large and calloused. These were the hands of a man who put in a hard day's work, every single day. He pulled the wagon to a neat stop right in front of Mrs. Fletcher's office. It was as blunt as his letter. For a moment, nobody moved. Luke Carver just sat there on his wagon, sizing up Clara, and Clara stood on the porch, sizing him right back. Mrs. Fletcher knew well enough to stay quiet. Clara saw skin baked by the sun and lines around his eyes from squinting across open country. His eyes were a mix of brown and green, like a pine forest after a good rain. He looked just like his letter sounded, plain and honest, and she saw a loneliness so deep it made her heart ache. Then he spoke, his voice deep and rough. You're smaller than I figured. It was not the smooth talk she was used to from men. You're quieter, Clara replied, her own voice steady. Something flickered in his eyes, maybe surprise, maybe respect. He swung down from the wagon. He moved with the easy grace of a man who knew hard work. Up close, he was even taller. She had to crane her neck just to look him in the eye. Mrs. Fletcher says you're a stubborn one, he said. Mr. Henderson just found me inconvenient. Henderson's a fool. He wants a woman who just nods and smiles while he repeats his daddy's mistakes. Luke's eyes looked her over, taking her measure. Did you correct his irrigation plans? They were wasteful. He asked, and were you right? She said yes. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. He said the other women from Cedar Creek always wanted to talk. About nothing and everything. About feelings, and whether they were, quote, connecting. He paused. Can you handle the quiet? I prefer it to empty chatter. Now he gave a small smile. Good. He turned to Mrs. Fletcher. She'll need supplies. Winter stores. My credit at Chen's is good for it. Mrs. Fletcher spoke up. Sam's already outfitted her this week. She's been working off the bill helping me out. Luke's eyebrows went up, and he looked at Clara. It was a look of respect. You work fast, he said. I don't like wasting time. Neither do I. He went to the wagon. He pulled out a battered trunk. This everything you own? Clara thought of her other trunk at the boarding house. That one held her old Boston life. I have another trunk with clothes and books. Books are fine, she said. Need anything else from town before we head out? The question was so direct, Clara almost laughed. No courting, no sweet talk, just need anything before we go? She realized it was exactly what she had hoped for. No, she said. I am ready. Luke nodded once. Good. It is a 6-hour drive to the ranch. We need to leave soon to make it before dark. He looked at Mrs. Fletcher. Send the wedding papers to Judge Morrison. We will handle the official part when I come to town in March. Mrs. Fletcher's eyes got wide. You are taking her without? She came here for a marriage. I am agreeing to it. The paperwork is just paper. Luke's gaze returned to Clara, steady as a rock. Unless you've gone and changed your mind. Clara thought about Boston, all those stuffy rooms and her father's rules. She remembered that telegram from Mr. Henderson calling her difficult for simply having a mind of her own. Then she thought about Luke Carver's honest letter, with no fancy words, just the plain truth. I haven't changed my mind, she said, her voice steady. Then let's get your trunk. We're burning daylight. 20 minutes later, Clara was sitting right beside him on the wagon bench. Her trunk was tied down in the back next to his supplies, things like flour, coffee, and lamp oil. They left Greystone behind, the horses pulling them out into the wide-open country of Wyoming. For the first hour, you could have heard a pin drop. Luke just drove the team, his eyes on the trail. Clara watched as the last buildings of the town disappeared. Soon it was just rolling prairie, and then rough country with rocks jutting up like old, broken teeth. It was a beautiful and terrible land, and it didn't seem to care one bit about forgiveness. You're not afraid, Luke said, breaking the silence. It wasn't really a question. Clara turned to him. Afraid of what? She asked. Of any of this? The quiet? Me. A 6-hour ride with a man you just met? He glanced her way. The others, they were scared. They tried to cover it up, but a man can see things. You're not hiding a thing. Would it make a difference if I was? No, but I'd know you were telling a tall tale, and I don't hold with lying. Clara pulled her coat a little tighter. All right then, I'll give you the honest truth. I am terrified. Not of you, I'm scared of failing. Scared I'll prove them all right about me. But being scared has never stopped me from doing what I had to do, and it sure won't stop me now. Luke was quiet for a good long while. Good, he finally said, because Cedar Creek Ranch will test you. The quiet, the winters, the work. It tests everybody. If you go looking for a reason to quit, you'll find it. But if you're set on making it, he just shrugged. That's not exactly a vote of confidence, she said. I'm not an encouraging man. I told you I'm not good with words. I can teach you how to work the ranch. I'll keep you safe and fed. But I can't offer you comfort or small talk. Is what women expect from a husband. If that is what you are wanting, I am not wanting anything, Clara cut in. You said it yourself in your letter. No trying to change me, and I will not try to change you. I am holding you to that. He gave one of those small smiles. All right then, we understand each other. They rode on as the sun climbed and the snow began to melt away in patches. The road went from bad to worse until it was hardly a road at all, just old wagon ruts. Around midday, Luke stopped the wagon near a frozen creek. We will rest the horses, he said. There's jerky if you're hungry. Clara climbed down stiffly. Luke was already seeing to the horses, checking their hooves. He broke creek ice for their water. She watched the man work. He moved with a quiet, practiced skill and murmured something low. The horse answered him back. You're gentler with animals, she said. He gave her a hard look. Horses do not expect things. I ain't got in me to give. Like what? She asked him. He paused for a long moment. Comfort, company, and all that romance foolishness. He nearly spat the last word. My first wife, she was all about those kinds of romance books. Full of pretty words, kept asking if I thought they were beautiful. I told her words are nothing without action to back them up. She was gone in 3 days, said a man like me had no soul. Clara brought him some hardtack. The food was just plain fuel. That was a hard lesson she was learning out on the trail. Maybe you do have a soul, she said, thinking on it. Just a different kind. One that shows itself in doing, not in saying. He really looked at her then. She saw a crack in that wall he kept up. Most folks do not see it that way. Well, most folks are fools. For the first time, he let out a rusty laugh. You might be right about that. He finished up and sat on a boulder near her. So what is your real story, the one you do not tell? She chewed her hardtack slowly, considering the plain truth. She finally met his gaze. My mother spent her whole life making herself smaller and smaller, all to please my father. She just folded herself away, piece by piece, until nothing was left. She passed on when I was 23. At her funeral, I finally saw it. Nobody there truly knew who she was. They only knew what she did. That woman was gone years before. Luke just sat there watching her. His steady silence made it a whole lot easier to go on. And my father expected me to walk that very same path, to be some quiet, pretty little thing, but that just was not me. Every time I tried, it felt like I was suffocating. So I started speaking my mind when ladies were supposed to just smile and nod. My father said I was stubborn and difficult. He passed on, still angry with me for not being the daughter he wanted. Clara looked him square in the eye. And I don't regret it. I would rather be stubborn and alive than proper and dead inside. That is why Henderson sent you away then. He wanted a woman who would let him make his own mistakes without a word. I just am not built to watch a man do things wrong when I know the right way to do it. Luke stood up and said, well, there is plenty that needs doing right at Cedar Creek. You will have your hands full. He hitched the horses and turned back to her. But I need to know, are you looking for a marriage or just for an escape? The question hit her hard. Can it not be both, she asked. Depends, he said, tightening a strap. It can work if you are running toward who you are really meant to be. Clara climbed back on the wagon. And what about you? Are you searching for a wife or something else entirely? Luke got up beside her and took the reins. He urged the horses on before he finally spoke. I am looking for someone who will not leave when they find out who I really am. The honesty in his voice made her throat feel tight. Then I reckon we are both looking for the same thing. As they rode on, he told her about his ranch, 200 acres of high country he had bought and built on his own. He spoke of the hard work, from dawn until dusk, mending fences and getting ready for the long winters. Clara asked real questions about the cattle and how to survive when you are sick and all alone. You think about practical things, Luke said as the sun went down. The other women only asked about town dances. Out here, he said, surviving is a whole lot more important than socializing. I would rather survive than dance. Then we are going to get along just fine, she said with a small smile. The country grew rougher as they climbed, the road becoming little more than a suggestion through the deep pine forest. He talked about how he saved up for 5 years just to buy this piece of land. He spoke of the hard work, mending fences and hauling water, and how the winters could trap a man for weeks. Clara listened closely, asking good questions because she truly wanted to understand. She asked about the cattle and how a man could get by if he got sick way out here alone. You sure do think about practical things, Luke said, as the sun started to dip low. Is that a bad thing? No, ma'am, it is a good thing. The others just asked about church socials and going to dances. He shook his head. Out here, staying alive is more important. I reckon we are going to get along just fine. The land got rougher and steeper as they rode on into deep pine forests. The snow was thick on the branches, and the road was now just a hint of a trail. As Luke guided the wagon through the rough country, he finally said, "We're close now." Clara's heart pounded, trying to fill the silence. She asked if there were any other wives nearby. "'Fraid not," Luke answered plainly. "Nearest folks are a long 8 miles off, and they keep to themselves." He looked over at her. "I ought to warn you, Clara, I am not a man for a lot of talk. I work from dawn till dusk, but I give you my word I will never lie to you. And I will never make you feel small just so I can feel bigger. I have had enough empty promises to last a lifetime," she said. "Honest silence sounds just fine." Just then he pointed toward a small valley. "There it is. Cedar Creek Ranch. He stopped the horses, offering her one last chance. I can take you back to town tomorrow, no judgment. Clara climbed down into the snow and stood tall. I am not changing my mind. Luke nodded. Then welcome home. I will work from sunup to sundown and sometimes longer. There will be days, maybe weeks, where we hardly say a word to each other. But I will never lie to you. I will not pretend. I will teach you everything you need to know to survive out here. And I will always respect you. He looked over at her. If that is enough for you, then we will be fine. It is enough, Clara said, her voice firm. I have heard enough pretty words to last me a lifetime. Good. He pointed up ahead where the trees opened up to a little valley. In the fading light, she could see it. A cabin, a barn, and a fenced corral. Smoke was rising from the chimney. Cedar Creek Ranch. This was her new home now. As they rode down into the valley, she saw the cabin was bigger than she expected. Built from thick logs. A solid barn stood behind it, and a large corral stretched out beyond that. Everything was neat and well kept. You could tell a man took pride in this place. Luke pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. For a long moment, nobody moved. Clara just stared, feeling the weight of every single choice that brought her to this very spot. This is your last chance, Luke said, his voice quiet. If you change your mind, I will take you back. No questions asked. Clara climbed down from the wagon. Her new boots sank into the packed snow. She looked at the cabin. She looked out at the wide-open valley. She thought of Boston and all the pain. She remembered Luke's brutally honest words. I'm staying, she said. Luke simply nodded. Then welcome to Cedar Creek, Clara. Clara followed him into the warm cabin, stepping into her new life. For the first time in years, she felt like she could finally take a full breath. The place smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and the quiet strength of a man who worked hard. When Luke lit a lamp, she saw the room was bigger than it looked from the outside. It was one main room with a cozy sleeping loft up above and a big stone fireplace. Luke added some fresh wood and the coals began to glow bright once more. A simple table sat in the middle, and shelves on the wall held books and supplies. Everything was simple, but it was spotless. The floor was swept, and the dishes were all put away. This was not the home of a man who had given up. It was the home of a man who knew how to survive. The loft is all yours, Luke said, already carrying her trunk toward a sturdy ladder. I will sleep down here by the fire. It is more practical for keeping it going all night. She watched him climb, carrying her heavy trunk on one shoulder like it weighed nothing at all. She could not see the loft, but she had a feeling it would be just as clean and orderly as the rest of the cabin. There is fresh water in the bucket, Luke said, coming back down. The outhouse is about 30 feet from the door. Take a lantern at night. We have got wolves, and they are curious creatures. The thought of wolves should have scared her, but somehow it did not. Luke spoke of them like he spoke of the weather, just another part of life out here. Is there anything else I should know? She asked, wanting to be useful. Luke checked the fire in the cook stove. The cattle are in the pasture nearby. We have 4 horses in the barn. Do you know how to ride? I took lessons in Boston, she said. It is a start, I suppose. He nodded. In the soft lamplight, she could see the kind lines around his eyes. You must be hungry, he said softly. I will fix you some real food. I can cook, Clara offered, wanting to pull her own weight. Not tonight, he said firmly, already gathering ingredients from the shelves. You have traveled a long way. Just sit. I will make us something quick. Clara did as he said. She understood this was his home, and this was his way of making her welcome. She watched him work. He moved with a quiet purpose, never making a wasted motion. He brought out fresh bread, butter, and sliced some dried meat. A pot of beans was already simmering warmly on the stove. You cooked, she said with a small smile. You started this supper before you even left, Clara pointed out. How did you know I would agree to come? I did not, but a man has got to eat either way. Luke spooned beans into 2 bowls, then put bread and meat onto 2 plates. If you had refused, I would have just had leftovers. For the week. He set the food down and took the chair across from hers. For a moment, they just sat there. They looked at the simple meal between them. It dawned on Clara this was the first time she had eaten with a man who was not putting on a show. Her father always used meal times for his lectures. Mr. Henderson had filled every single silence with talk about how brilliant he was. But Luke, he just picked up his spoon and ate, perfectly content to let the quiet settle around them. It was comfortable. Clara followed his lead. The beans were mighty good, seasoned with salt pork and maybe some wild onions. The bread was heavy and filling, clearly made from scratch. The meal was not fancy, but it was honest and it was real, and she found herself eating with more appetite than she had felt in weeks. "You are a very good cook," she finally said. Luke just shrugged his shoulders. "It is practical. You cannot work if you do not eat properly." He paused for a moment. He seemed to be thinking on something, then kept on. "The others, the women who came here before, they wanted to take over the cooking right away. They said a man should not have to cook if he has a wife, but they did not know how to cook for ranch work. They made fancy things, delicate little things, food that might look good at a party, but it does not. Stick to your ribs through 12 hours of hard labor. Did you tell them that?" "I tried. They took it as me finding fault." He wiped up the last of the bean juice with his bread. "I stopped trying to explain and just went back to cooking for myself. They could eat what I made or they could not. It did not matter much to me." Clara set down her spoon. "Luke, I need to understand something. You said you need a wife, but it sounds to me like you get along just fine by yourself. Why do you keep trying?" He was quiet for a long time. His gaze was fixed down on his bowl. Outside, you could hear the wind picking up, whistling through the trees that circled the cabin. Clara waited. She was already learning that Luke's silences were not empty ones. They were full of thoughts that he was carefully sorting. He was just getting them in order before he spoke. "Being lonesome is different than being alone," he finally said. "I chose to be alone. I chose this life, away from the towns and the crowds and all that noise. But being lonesome—" He looked up, and Clara saw a deep hurt in his eyes. "Lonesomeness just creeps in, whether you choose it or not. It is waking up knowing you will not speak to another living soul all day. It is having a thought and then realizing there is no one in the world to share it with. It is wondering if you died tomorrow, how long would it take for anyone to even notice?" The honesty of it hit Clara like a physical blow. This was the raw truth that all those poets back in Boston tried to capture with their flowery words, but they never quite could. The simple, devastating truth of it. "I do not expect romance," Luke continued, "or even friendship, really, but I hoped, that having another person here might make the silence feel less heavy. It might give the work more meaning than just surviving. More than just getting by until the next season." He pushed his empty bowl away. "But the women who came, they wanted me to be different. They wanted me to fill their loneliness, but they completely ignored mine. So they left, and I am still here. And the silence is still heavy." Clara reached her hand across the table, not quite touching his, but close enough that he could reach for hers. Feel her presence. "I am not here to fix you. I am here because I understand that kind of loneliness. The kind where you are surrounded by people but still feel all alone because nobody sees who you really are." Luke's eyes met hers and something just passed between them. It was not romance, but a real recognition. "Well then, maybe this will work," he said quietly, and Clara nodded. "Maybe it will." They finished their supper in a silence that felt a whole lot less empty than before. Luke started clearing the dishes, waving off Clara's offer to help with that same quiet stubbornness. She watched him wash each dish so carefully and stack them just right on the shelf. This was a man who took care in his work. "I will show you the property tomorrow," Luke said. "Tonight you should get some rest. That long journey takes a lot out of a person." And just like that, Clara felt it. The weight of the trip, the worry, it all came crashing down on her. She swayed on her feet, grabbing the edge of the table to keep her balance. Luke was by her side in an instant, his hand steadying her arm. "When did you last get a proper night's sleep?" "The night before Mr. Henderson sent me on my way," she admitted with a tired smile. "That was 5 days ago," he said, a note of concern in his voice. "You cannot work on no sleep." He guided her toward the ladder, his hand still supporting her elbow for good measure. "There are extra blankets in the loft if you get cold. It gets chilly up here." Every rung of that ladder felt like a challenge, but the loft was clean and had a real bed. Her trunk sat at the foot of it, and a small window looked out into the dark, starry night. Someone had already laid a thick, soft quilt over the mattress. "That was my mother's," Luke called up from the floor below. "She pieced it together the year I was born." Clara ran her hand over the quilt, feeling the careful stitches, feeling the love that went into it. This was not just a blanket. It was a sign of trust, more than any fancy words could say. "Thank you," she called down softly. After a moment, she heard him reply, "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Luke." She changed into her nightgown, too tired to even think about modesty. The bed was comfortable, with a mattress stuffed with straw that smelled sweet and dry. She pulled the heavy quilt up to her chin, expecting to fall asleep right away. Instead, her mind woke right up. She was in Wyoming, miles from town, with a man she just met. She was about to start a life that was completely different from anything she had ever known. Down below, she could hear Luke moving about, the soft scrape of a chair, the rustle of a page turning. She realized he was reading one of his books. That normal, quiet sound somehow made everything feel real. Before, this was her life now, this little cabin, this quiet man, this big, wide-open country. And for some reason, that didn't scare her. It felt like she'd finally found solid ground. Clara pulled the quilt up tight and let herself drift off to sleep. Her last thought was a simple one. "I'm home." She woke to the smell of coffee in the pale morning light. For a second, she couldn't place where she was. The sounds, the light, it was all different. Then she remembered. Theater Creek Ranch. Luke Carver. Her new life. She dressed quickly in the chilly air, her fingers fumbling with the buttons on the flannel shirt. These were sturdy working clothes, not like the fancy things she wore back in Boston. But they were warm, and out here, that's what mattered most. Downstairs, she found Luke by the fire. He'd already gotten the coffee going and was pulling on a heavy coat. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's hot. I've got to see to the stock." "I can help," Clara said, surprising even herself. Luke paused and looked at her. "You know how?" "No," she admitted, "but I can learn." He gave a slow nod, seeming to appreciate that. "All right, get your coat. The work is messy." A few minutes later, Clara followed him out into the pre-dawn dark, her breath making little white clouds. The only sounds were their boots crunching in the snow and the far-off call of a lone coyote. The barn was warmer than outside, lit by 2 lanterns that cast a flickering golden light. 4 horses nickered softly as they approached. "This is Scout," Luke said, stroking a tall horse's nose. "And that quiet fella is Thunder." He pointed to the other 2. "The mare is Rosie, and the gelding is Duke." Clara reached out a hand, and Rosie gently sniffed her palm. "They need hay and water twice a day," Luke explained as he worked. "You have to watch their hooves for ice, and make sure their blankets don't rub them raw." He showed her each task with a calm, practiced ease. Clara watched everything he did, memorizing how to break the ice in the trough and how much hay to give. Luke taught the way he did everything else, direct, practical, and with no wasted words. He just assumed she was smart enough to keep up, and Clara was determined not to let him down. This was her chance to build a new life from the ground up. She was going to prove that she was tougher than anyone ever thought. "Your turn," he said, handing her the heavy pitchfork. Clara took it, feeling the rough handle in her gloved hands. She moved to the haystack and tried to copy his easy motion. The first scoop was heavy, and the second one made her arms tremble. She finally understood this was brutally hard work, day after day. "Take smaller loads," Luke advised, his voice kind. "Better to take 10 trips than get yourself hurt on the first one." It took her much longer, but she finished feeding the horses, her arms burning. Luke simply watched her work and gave a quiet nod of approval. "All right, time to feed the cattle," he said. About 20 shaggy-looking cows were clustered near a feeder. Their warm breath made a big cloud in the cold morning air. "Herefords," Luke explained, "a real hardy breed, good for this climate. They're smart enough to find grass even under the snow." As he poured the feed, she saw they were much bigger up close. They had surprisingly intelligent eyes. "Can I touch one?" she asked. "That old girl on the end is gentle. Just move real slow." Clara walked over carefully, holding out her hand like before. The cow let her stroke its broad, coarse forehead, which was warm to the touch. Well now, she likes you, Luke observed with a small smile. Animals know when someone's a good soul. You ain't aggressive. Just always be respectful. They're big animals and can hurt you by accident. Come on, the chickens are next. Then I'll make us some breakfast. Inside the coop, about a dozen hens clucked, annoyed at the wait. Go ahead and gather the eggs, Luke said, handing her a basket. But you watch out for Gertrude. That red hen in the back will peck you. Clara carefully slid her hands under the warm, feathery hens. Most of them just clucked, but Gertrude was true to his warning. She landed a sharp, surprising peck right on Clara's wrist. Told you so, Luke said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Gertrude runs this coop. Her space. When they got back, the sun was painting the whole valley in gold. Clara's arms ached something fierce. Her wrists throbbed, and she was colder than she had ever been. But for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. You did good, Luke said, stomping snow off his boots. Most folks have a harder time. She smiled a little. I am stronger than I look. I am starting to see that. Inside, Luke cooked up a real breakfast while Clara thawed by the fire. He made it look like second nature. Bacon sizzled in a skillet, and eggs were cracked with one hand. It did not seem strange on such a big fella. It just looked like a man who knew how to survive. They ate quietly together with the morning sun streaming through the little windows. Clara could already feel her muscles starting to complain, and she knew tomorrow would be worse. But it was a good kind of ache, the kind that proved she had done something real. So tell me about this ranch, she said. How did a man like you end up out here? Luke took a slow sip of his coffee. I grew up back in Missouri. My daddy worked other men's land. Never had a thing to call his own. The work wore him out, and he died young. I decided right then, I would rather own 5 acres than work 50 for somebody else. He saved up for 15 years, took every job he could find, came to Wyoming territory in '70, where land was still cheap. I built this cabin with my own 2 hands and bought my first cattle. So she asked, and the wives? That first year was all right. A man stays too busy to get lonely. But that second winter? That winter, he admitted, I started talking to my horses just to hear a voice. I went 2 whole months without seeing another soul. That is when I learned being alone and being lonely are not the same thing. So you put an ad out for a wife? A Mrs. Fletcher suggested it. She was a matchmaker of sorts. Luke set his cup down. The first woman stayed 2 months. She wanted me to be a man I was not. More talkative, more social. The second one had notions of civilizing me. Wanted this beer gone and for me to attend church every Sunday. And the third, she lasted 6 weeks. She left in a snowstorm in the dead of night. Said the quiet was suffocating her. That living with me was like living with a ghost. His voice was steady, but Clara could hear the old hurt hiding underneath it all. Clara reached across that little table and covered his rough hand with her own. She was wrong. You are not a ghost. You're just a man who prefers honest silence to a bunch of empty words. His fingers tightened around hers, just for a second. How long do you think you will last? He asked. It should have been an insult. But Clara heard what it really was. Not a challenge, but a genuine question. Question from a man who'd been left too many times. I'll last as long as you'll have me, she said simply. I meant what I said. I'm not looking for a rescue. I'm looking for a place where I can be useful and honest, and myself. If Cedar Creek Ranch is that place, then I am not going anywhere. And if it is not, we can figure that out together. She squeezed his hand. But I am not running away, Luke. I crossed half a continent to get away from folks who wanted me to be smaller. I will not give up the first place that might let me be bigger. Something in Luke's face softened, the tension he had been carrying finally easing. All right then, let's see if we can make this work. He stood up and gathered their empty plates. I need to ride the fence line today. Check for storm damage. You can come with me or stay here. It is your choice. Clara did not hesitate. I will come. An hour later, Clara was on a mare named Rosie, whose gentle gait made her old park riding feel silly. Luke rode Thunder right beside her, looking relaxed on the rough terrain. They rode for a good 30 minutes, following the fence that marked the ranch's northern boundary. See that post? Luke pointed to one leaning at a bad angle. Storm damage. We have to reset it before the whole section comes down. They got off their horses, and Luke pulled tools from his saddlebag, a hammer, nails, and wire cutters. Clara watched him study the damage, his hands sure and professional. Can you hold this steady for me? He asked. Clara grabbed the post, holding it upright while Luke drove stakes into the ground to support it. The jolt of each hammer blow went through her arms, but she held on tight, knowing that her strength mattered right here. She was not just for show, she was necessary. Good, Luke said when he finished. You have steady hands. They kept on along the fence, stopping 2 more times for repairs. Each time, Luke showed Clara what to look for, the way a post would lean, the rust that weakened a wire, or the tracks in the snow that meant an animal had been pushing on it. You are teaching me, Clara said as they got back on their horses. Of course I am. You cannot be here if you do not know how to take care of the place. Luke nudged Thunder forward. What if I get hurt or sick? You would need to handle things yourself till I was back on my feet. The simple sense of it struck Clara right in the heart. This was not a husband keeping secrets to hold on to his power. This was a partner making sure they both had the skills to get by. Luke was teaching her because he trusted her to be capable, because he knew that her being competent made them both safer. My father never taught me a single useful thing, Clara said, guiding Rosie around a big fallen branch. He said ladies did not need to know about business or money or how the world really worked. He said that was what men were for. She asked, how did that work out for your mother? He was quiet for a moment. My father had to explain their finances to her on her deathbed, just so she would understand what I was inheriting. Clara felt that old anger rise up, sharp and bitter. She was not afraid of dying, but of leaving. My inheritance was just enough to get me here. I have a little bit left over. My uncle's got the house and business. They rode in silence for a few minutes. Independence matters more than comfort. Besides, I am not good at taking orders. Clara laughed, a real laugh that surprised a rabbit. They reached the eastern edge of the property. Cedar Creek ran through a narrow canyon there. They stood together on the rocky bank. This is where the ranch gets its name, he said. It has water, shelter, and good grazing. She could see the affection in his eyes. This land was more than a place, it was home. Tell me the real reason you left, he asked. She remembered his rule to say what you mean. I was suffocating back there, she told him. Every single day was exactly the same. I was always judged for being who I am. Watching my friends marry looked like a prison. I didn't run, she corrected him. I escaped. Were you running from something or to something? She thought about that day after the funeral. She had to make a hard choice, to stay and fade or leave and risk it all. Both, she said. I was running from one mess and headed toward another. I just did not know what it was yet. Luke asked me plain and simple, does Cedar Creek Ranch, 40 miles from anywhere, feel like freedom or just a different kind of prison? But I looked out at the canyon in that big old Texas sky, and all I felt was the cold, honest wind. He said, I'm learning that you are tougher than you look, but told me I needed to rest up. I would not sit idle, so I told him, fine, then teach me how to make bread. To her comfort, it feels like breathing, she said quietly. For the first time, it feels like I can finally breathe. Luke met her gaze, and a silent understanding passed between them. Two people who knew what it meant to be lonely. Good, he said after a moment. Breathing matters more than anything else. As they rode on, he showed her the pastures and groves, his voice filled with a quiet pride for the land he'd built his life around. You truly love it here, Clara observed. It's all mine, Luke said simply. Built it with my own hands. He then explained, that is one reason I need a wife, someone to help carry the load so I do not break. Back at the cabin, Clara's body ached from the ride, but it was a good earned pain from real work. You did well today, Luke told her as they put the tack away. I am learning you are tougher than you look. He told her to rest while he checked the cattle, warning her not to burn herself out in the first week. I'm not resting, she insisted. Teach me how to make bread. Luke looked surprised, then pleased by her practical nature. All right then, bread making it is. The afternoon passed in a warm haze of flour, with Luke patiently showing her how to work the dough. His large, rough rancher's hands moved with a surprising gentleness. My mother taught me, he said, shaping a loaf. She said a person living alone needs to know how to feed themselves properly. Clara copied his movements, thinking this new life required a toughness she was just beginning to discover in herself. He looked surprised, then agreed. His big, calloused hands were surprisingly gentle with the dough. My mother taught me, he said. She believed a person living alone needed to know how to feed themselves properly. That night, aching all over, he brought me a cup of willow bark tea for the soreness. Clara, Luke turned, his face all serious. I admire your get up and go, but you need to slow your roll. This here is not a sprint. It is the long haul, every day for months, maybe years. If you run yourself ragged this first week, it's just trying to prove a point. You will be no good to me when I really need the help. He was making perfect sense, even if it chafed at Clara's pride. All right, fine, but I am not sitting idle. Teach me how to make bread. Luke just blinked at her. Bread? You make a good loaf. I want to learn. Clara pulled her gloves off, her fingers stiff from the cold. If I am going to be staying here, I ought to know how to make the things we need. A little something crossed Luke's face. Maybe surprise, or maybe he was pleased by her common sense. All right then, bread making it is. The rest of the afternoon was a warm, flour-dusted blur. Luke turned out to be a patient teacher. He showed Clara how to mix the dough, how to knead it just right, and how to tell when it had risen enough. His big, rough hands, calloused from all that ranch work, handled the dough with a surprising gentleness. My mother taught me how, he said, shaping the dough into loaves. She said any soul living out on their own needs to know how to feed themselves right. Said too many fellas tried to live on jerky and beans and just wasted away. Clara worked her own dough, copying his movements. Was this what it was like to be a ranch wife, a farm wife? Seemed similar, but different too. She was tough, she had to be. My mama raised 6 kids, mostly on her own while my pa was away. Luke slid the loaves in the oven. She would have liked you, Clara. You remind me of her, practical, stubborn, and not afraid of work. She had no time for feelings when there was a job to be done. Clara shaped her own loaves, feeling proud of the work. I think I would have liked her too, she said softly. As they worked, the cabin began to feel less like his space and more like theirs. They worked in a comfortable, easy quiet through the afternoon. The only sounds were their chores and the crackling fire. When the bread came out, golden and smelling like heaven, Clara felt a true sense of pride. It was her own bread, exquisite, made with her own 2 hands. It was simple, honest bread that would feed them for days. Perfect, Luke said, tapping the crust. You are a natural. He cut a thick slice, steam rising from the middle, and handed it to her. Welcome to Cedar Creek, Clara. For real this time. She took a bite, and for the second time she thought, I'm home. That night they sat by the fire after supper. Outside, the wind howled through the valley like a lonesome song. Tell me about the wolves, Clara finally asked. The real ones. Luke looked up from his book. What do you want to know? Should I be afraid of them? Be cautious, not afraid. They mostly want to stay clear of people. There is a pack that runs this valley. 5 adults, I reckon. They are beautiful animals, bigger than you would expect. The alpha is a big fella with a white patch. I call him Ghost. Clara leaned in closer. You named him? He is more curious than the others. Just sits on that ridge and watches. We are all just trying to survive the winters out here. So we have an understanding. I do not hunt his family, and he has mostly kept his end of the bargain with my cattle. Luke sighed and walked to the window. Come look at this. Clara joined him and saw a pair of eyes glowing in the dark. That's him, Luke said softly. That's Ghost. He's just checking on you. Clara felt a deep stir in her chest. This was the real wild. A wolf was standing not 100 yards from where she slept. Back in Boston, this would have been terrifying to no end. Here, she just whispered, he's beautiful. Luke looked at her, surprised. Most folks just see danger. I see an animal trying to get by, same as us. That seems honest, she said. The eyes vanished back into the shadows. Luke turned from the window. Well, you ain't what I figured. He expected she'd last a month before complaining about the work. He thought she'd want to change everything to be like the city she left. I left that life for a reason, Clara told him. Why would I bring it here? A comfortable quiet settled in the cabin between the two of them. I'm glad you came, Luke said at last. I wasn't sure I would be, but I am. He returned to his chair and his book. Clara picked up his torn shirt. She began to mend the seam without a word being said. They settled into an easy rhythm, sharing the small space just fine. As Clara climbed to the loft that night, she paused on the ladder. Luke, thank you for teaching me today, for trusting me. He looked up from his reading. Thank you for being capable. It makes things easier. Clara smiled and went up to her bed under the borrowed quilt. Outside, the stars were scattered across the sky like diamonds. Somewhere out there, Ghost was leading his pack through the night. And right here in this cabin, Clara was learning to do the same thing. She fell asleep dreaming of a life built on honest work, not empty words. The third morning dawned with a cold so sharp it hurt to breathe. Clara woke to frost on her window and her body screaming in protest. Every muscle she used yesterday had turned into a burning knot of pain. She heard Luke's steady footsteps climbing up the ladder to check on her. The next morning I was moving slower than molasses in winter, but he just gave me a look of sympathy. It will get better, he said. It took me about 2 months to stop hurting, but I was building the cabin at the same time, taking it with gratitude. She wrapped her cold fingers around the warm mug. The tea was bitter, but she drank it down, knowing it was medicine, not a treat. Luke watched her a second, then gave a nod and climbed down without another word. By the time she finally made it down that ladder, moving like she was 100 years old, pride be darned, Luke had breakfast on the table. It was oatmeal with dried berries and a precious spoonful of honey. There was more of that bitter tea, and surprisingly, a look from him of sympathy that did not feel like he was looking down on her. It will get easier, he said as she carefully lowered herself into the chair. That first week is always a bear. Your body is just learning new ways to move. You just have to give it time. How long until you stopped hurting every morning? Luke thought on it, stirring his oatmeal. About 2 months, I reckon, but I was building this cabin while I was learning the ranch work, so I might not be the best one to ask. Clara made herself eat. She knew her body needed the fuel, even though her stomach was churning from the pain. So, what is on the list for today? Nothing for you. You are resting. And that is not a suggestion. His voice was firm, but not mean. I have seen folks try to push through this kind of sore and end up hurting themselves something awful. Torn muscles, strained backs. Then they are laid up for weeks instead of just being sore for a few days. You are going to rest today. Let that willow bark tea do its job. And tomorrow you will feel stronger for it. Clara had half a mind to argue. Every bone in her body told her she needed to prove her worth to show she could handle whatever this ranch threw at her. But Luke was making sense, and more than that, she could hear real concern in his voice. He was not trying to bench her. He was just trying to keep her in the game. All right, she finally said, but I can still work inside, mending, cooking, putting things in order. That is fair. Luke stood up and took his empty bowl to the wash basin. I will be out working the south fence line today. I ought to be back by mid-afternoon. There is some salt pork that needs slicing for tomorrow, and I noticed these shelves could use some reorganizing. Coffee next to the lamp oil seems a mite dangerous. Clara managed a smile through her pain. I will handle it. He pulled on his heavy coat, saying, I know you will. The fire is banked to last, he added. Just add 1 log at a time if it gets low. At the door, he paused. And Clara, remember you are allowed to rest. After he left, the cabin felt quiet and waiting. Clara moved slowly, her body aching with every step. She sliced the salt pork with a careful hand, remembering her mother's lessons from the kitchen. Then she put the shelves in order, grouping the dry goods, tinned items, and medical supplies properly. She mended 2 of Luke's shirts and darned 3 pairs of socks, her needle moving with a familiar rhythm. The steady work gave her mind time to wander. Just a week ago, she was being called stubborn in an office. 5 days ago, she was worried sick that Luke would turn her away. Yesterday, she was learning about horses and bread. Now she was 40 miles from anywhere. She was doing simple home tasks that felt more important than anything she had ever done in Boston. She realized the difference was purpose. In Boston, mending was for show, a womanly skill. Here, she mended Luke's shirts so he could work safely in the harsh weather. In Boston, a tidy pantry showed off her skills. Here, it saved precious time and prevented mistakes. There was nothing soft or decorative about Greystone, just the raw bones of the earth. She finally understood why Luke loved this place so much. A movement on the ridge caught her eye. For a second, she thought Luke was returning early from his work. But then she recognized the gray shape. It was Ghost, the wolf Luke had pointed out. The animal stood against the snow, just watching the cabin with that same curious look Luke described. She didn't move a muscle, barely even breathe, seeing that big wolf. He was a magnificent creature with intelligent eyes that were sizing her up. That wolf was a top predator, no doubt about it, but Clara felt no fear. Instead, she felt a strange connection to another soul, just trying to survive. Ghost held her gaze for a long moment, then turned and trotted off. He disappeared into the trees like he was born to the wilderness. Her heart was pounding, not with fear, but a wild kind of joy. Back in Boston, a story like that would be told for years to come. But out here in Texas, it was just another Tuesday afternoon. Luke came home as the sun went down, stomping snow off his boots. He looked worn out, but his eyes lit up when he smelled dinner cooking. "That smells mighty good," he said, hanging up his heavy coat. "I hope it's all right," Clara said, stirring the pot of hot stew. "It's better than fine," Luke said, warming his hands by the fire. "This is your home now, Clara. You don't need my permission for things." His words wrapped around her like the warmest shawl she'd ever known. In just 3 days, he had made her feel like she truly belonged. "Ghost came by today," she told him while ladling out the stew. Luke just nodded. "He was likely checking on you, seeing if you fit in." "Well, he didn't attack," Luke said with a hint of a smile. "So I reckon you do." "That old wolf is mighty particular about who he tolerates," Luke explained. "The woman before you tried to shoot him, so he kept his distance until she left." Clara considered that. "So he judges a person's character better than most folks do." After a moment, Luke said, "You did good work today. The others, they acted like doing their share was some grand favor to me." "They were looking for romance," she replied softly. "They needed you to praise their efforts and felt unvalued when you simply accepted them." "Most women are taught their worth comes from that kind of praise," Clara continued. "Do you need that?" he asked directly. "I used to think so," she admitted, "but I just want to be seen as competent. When you said I did good work, that was more than enough." A tension eased from Luke's shoulders. "I am not built for constant reassurance, but I can sure recognize capable. I reckon we're a good match." They cleaned up in a comfortable quiet that felt more honest than any romance. Afterwards, he pulled out a worn deck of cards. "You play?" "My mother taught me poker," Clara said with a small smile. She felt a woman in a man's world needed to know how to call a bluff. As they played, she was surprised to find he was a skilled and intelligent opponent, one who played fair and won with quiet grace. "It's not wrong," Clara said, sopping up stew with her bread. "It's just different. Most women are taught that their value comes from a man's praise. And without that, they feel like they are invisible. Do you need all that?" Clara thought on it a moment. "I used to think so back home. I wanted folks to see I had more to offer than just my looks. What I really wanted was for my skills to be seen, to be counted as competent. When you said I did good work, that mattered more than any sweet words." Luke nodded slow. "I can tell you when you're capable, but all that other stuff, I'm not built for that. Then we're well matched because I don't need it." A tension Clara hadn't even noticed in him finally seemed to let go. They cleaned up supper together, falling into an easy rhythm. It was a small comfort, making the cabin feel like home. Afterward, Luke brought out a worn deck of cards. "You play?" he asked. "My mama taught me," she said. "She said a woman in a man's world needs to know how to call a bluff." Luke's eyebrows went up. "Your mother sounds like a smart lady." Clara just nodded, shuffling the cards like a professional. They played a few hands by the warm fire. Clara was surprised to find out Luke was a darn good player. He played smart and fair, and never gloated a bit when he won. She was learning Luke had a clever mind behind that quiet face. "You play smarter than the fellas back in Missouri," Luke said after she won again. "They just played on luck. You play with your head." "My mother taught me to understand the odds," she said, then asked, "Do you feel trapped here?" He thought for a moment. "Just the opposite. I feel free out here. There is freedom in being alone, no one to judge you. You do not have to pretend to be someone you are not. But it can be lonely," he admitted. "Less so now that you are here." His words were simple and honest, straight from the heart. "It is less lonely for me, too," she whispered back. When she went to bed, her body still hurt, but not nearly as bad. The willow bark tea had worked, just as Luke promised it would. She was beginning to see his years alone had made him wise, not ignorant. The sound of shouting in the dark woke her up with a jolt. Down below, Luke was already moving, his boots hitting the floorboards hard. She hurried down the ladder to see him pulling on his coat. "What is happening?" she asked as he grabbed his rifle from the wall. "It is Henderson. Trouble with his animals. Stay inside and lock the door." His voice was firm, leaving no room to argue. Then he was gone. She watched from the window as his lantern bounced across the dark valley. She could see lights over at the Henderson ranch. Then she heard the terrible, frightened sound of cattle bellowing. The minutes felt like hours as she paced the small cabin, worried sick. Finally, she could not take it anymore and quickly got dressed. She stood on the porch with her own lantern, watching and waiting. As the sky began to lighten, she saw two people walking back. It was Luke, and he was helping Mr. Henderson, who was moving very slowly. The man was limping badly, holding his side as Clara ran to meet them. "What in the world happened?" she asked, forgetting Luke's order to stay inside. "A cougar," Luke said grimly. "Henderson fought it and lost." Then Henderson stumbled through the door, his face gray with pain and his coat torn and bloody. Clara jumped into action immediately. "Get him to the chair by the fire." She went right to the shelves for Luke's medical supplies. She saw the wounds and said, "He is going to need stitching." Henderson looked up at her with shame. "You are the bride I sent back." Clara knelt beside him, checking 3 long gashes across his ribs. "This is going to hurt," she told him plain and simple. She poured whiskey over the wounds, and he hissed through his teeth. She worked fast, just like her mother taught her. "Luke, I need better light." As Luke brought 2 lanterns close, Clara threaded her needle. She had stitched plenty of fabric, but never a wound this deep. "You sure you know what you are doing?" Henderson asked, his voice tight. "We are both about to find out," Clara said, meeting his eyes. "Hold still." Her hands were perfectly steady as she began to stitch. He gripped the arms of the chair so hard the wood creaked, but he did not cry out. Luke watched over her shoulder, his presence solid and reassuring. "Why did you come back for him?" Clara asked Luke, needing the conversation. "He is my neighbor," Luke said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Out here, you help folks who need it. Otherwise, nobody survives." Clara finished the last stitch and wrapped the wounds with a tight, clean bandage. "All done," she announced. "You will need to keep these clean and dream. If you see any infection, you will need a doctor. Then do not let them get infected," she said, washing the blood from her hands. "Luke, help me get him situated on the bench to lie flat." They settled him with a blanket, and he was asleep in minutes. Clara watched over him, her hands still trembling from the ordeal. "You did good," Luke said softly. "My mother taught me how. She always said a woman might need to know, with no doctor around. I never thought I would actually need the skill. That is frontier life." Luke started making coffee. "Henderson is a lucky man." "Did he kill the cougar?" "No, he only drove it off." "It will be back," Luke said, his jaw tightening. "They do not give up. I will need to track it today." A cold dread settled in Clara's stomach. "That is dangerous," she said. "A cougar nearest the ranch is a problem." He handed her a cup of coffee. "I will take the rifle and go scout." "I will come with you." "No, Luke, no." He looked her straight in the eyes. "I am not risking you on a cougar hunt. You are too valuable to lose." "Then you are too valuable to lose over your pride," she shot back. "You know enough to keep things running for a few days." His voice was gentle. "Clara, I appreciate the help, but this is my job. Let me do it." She wanted to argue, but she understood. His 5 years of work beat her 4 days. Her pride was not worth more than his experience on a dangerous hunt. "Fine," she finally said, "but you had better come back." "I intend to." A softer look came over him. "I have got reasons to come back now." Luke saddled his horse, checking his ammunition with a practiced eye. Clara stood on the porch, memorizing the sight of him, just in case. He swung into the saddle. "If I am not back by full dark, do not come looking. Ride to town and get help. Promise me." "I promise." She watched him ride toward the trees, her heart caught in her throat. When he disappeared, she felt his absence like a sharp physical wound. Clara threw herself into work, anything to quiet her worried mind. She mucked out the stalls, fed the stock, and gathered eggs from those feisty hens. Every job took twice as long as it did for Luke, but she got it done, needing to prove a point. She had to prove she could handle the ranch alone if it came to that. By mid-afternoon, she had run out of chores. The animals were fed, the cabin was tidy, and bread was rising for morning. She tried mending, but her hands were shaking too much to hold a needle steady. She tried one of Luke's books, but the words just blurred on the page. They didn't make a lick of sense. Finally, she just stood by the window, watching the trees and praying to a God she was not even sure was listening. The sun dipped behind the western mountains, stretching shadows across the valley. Clara lit the lanterns, preparing in case she had to ride out for help. She went ahead and saddled Rosie, just in case. She packed a few supplies, some water, food, and extra bullets for the rifle she barely knew how to shoot. Then, full dark fell, and still no Luke. Clara stood on that porch, staring into the blackness, wondering if she should keep her promise or break it and go find him. Her head told her to honor her word and stay put, but her heart told her to go find him, right now. Just then, she heard hoofbeats. Scout appeared from the darkness. Clara nearly buckled with relief when she saw Luke riding in. He looked plumb tuckered out, but he was in one piece. "You are all right," she breathed. He just handed her the reins. "Tend to him, please," Luke said. "I need to sit before I fall." Clara cared for Scout, and the familiar work calmed her shaking hands. When she returned, Luke was slumped by the fire without his coat. "Did you find it?" she asked. He nodded. "Tracked it 12 miles up. It has plenty of game up there. It is not coming back for our cattle." Luke looked at her. "You handled things here just fine." He could see the bread was rising and all the animals were tended to. "Good," Vine said, leaning his head back. "I'm sorry I worried you. You did your job just like you said you would." "Luke," she said, "next time we talk about the danger first. We have to decide together if the risk is worth taking." "We are responsible to each other now," Clara countered. "You wanted a partner to share the load. Well, let me." He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "You are right. I am not used to it, but you are right. We decide together." They sat in a tired but comfortable silence by the fire. When Luke stood to check the horses, Clara stopped him. "I already did," she said. "Everything is done for the night." A look of surprise and deep gratitude crossed his face. "This is my ranch too, remember? My work to do." "Get some rest, Luke," she said before climbing to the loft. She heard him bank the fire and settle into his bedroll. They were the sounds of a man who was finally learning he was not alone. The silence in the cabin was no longer empty, but peaceful. They saw each other truly with no need to pretend. A judge would make things official the next day. But Clara knew their real marriage had already started. It was built on trust and getting through hard times together. This was the partnership she had traveled so far to find. Hearing Luke's quiet breathing below, she smiled in the dark. For the third time, she knew she was finally home. The next weeks fell into a natural, easy rhythm. Clara's body grew strong from the hard ranch work. Luke taught her how to read the weather in the clouds. She taught him the comfort of a hot meal and an orderly house. They developed simple routines that just plain worked. He would start the fires while she made the coffee. They ate breakfast together and planned out the day. Dinner was a slower time for talk or comfortable silence. Judge Morrison rode in on a Tuesday through a light snow. He was an older fellow with a weathered face and kind eyes. Luke made the introductions. "Clara, this is Judge Morrison." Clara shook his hand, feeling his gaze size her up. Inside by the fire, he pulled the papers from his bag. "This here is all pretty straightforward," he said gently. It was a marriage certificate and the ranch property rights. Clara read every single word, just as her mother taught her. The papers made them legal partners in Cedar Creek Ranch. If anything happened to Luke, everything would be hers. "This is fair," she said, picking up the pen with a steady hand. Luke signed his name, and then Clara signed hers. With a few strokes of ink, she became Clara Carver. "Well then," the judge declared, "I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." But they just looked at each other and smiled. For that later. "Listen now, I have married 16 couples in this territory. 12 were like y'all. Of those 12, a good number have already failed or are just plain unhappy. The folks who make it out here know marriage is not about some storybook romance. It is about survival and honest partnership. That is what we are building," Clara said. Morrison put his papers up. "Luke, you are a lucky man. Do not you go and waste it." "I do not intend to." Morrison stayed for a meal, sharing news from town. The Zimmerman place lost cattle to the cold, and Henderson was still bitter about the cougar. He said Mrs. Fletcher had matched up 2 more couples, and they seemed content. "She asks about you," Morrison told Clara. "Wants to know if you are making it." "Tell her I am thriving," Clara said with strength. "I will thank her properly myself." After the judge left, Clara stood on the porch and watched him ride off. Luke came out of the cabin to stand beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked her. "I am officially married," she said, "to a man I met just 8 days ago." "Are you having second thoughts?" "No," she said, "just taking it all in." She smiled a little. "In Boston, this would have meant a year of parties and planning." "And you would prefer that?" he asked. Clara thought about the big city weddings, all the expensive gowns and performances that often hid so much sadness. Then she thought about their simple morning. "No, I prefer this. This feels real." Luke nodded his head slowly. Then he reached out and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm. They stood together, watching the endless Wyoming sky. "Thank you," Luke said in a low voice. "For staying, for not running when it got hard. Thank you for letting me be useful." "Clara, you are more than useful. You are exactly what this place needed." He squeezed her hand. "What I needed." They were 2 lonely people. In their own ways, learning a partnership is not always passion. Sometimes it is built on seeing the strength and the need in one another. That night, Luke brought out a small wooden box that Clara had not seen before. "This was my mother's," he told her. "She said to give it to a wife worth keeping." Clara opened the box with care. In it was a delicate silver locket, old but beautiful. "Oh, Luke, I cannot." "Yes, you can. You are my wife now, for real." He picked up the locket and opened it, showing 2 faded pictures of his folks from long ago. "This belonged to my grandparents. My mother wore it every day of her life. She wanted it to go to a woman who understood that. Marriage is hard work, not some fairy tale. That being partners is more important than passion." Clara's throat went tight as Luke fastened the chain. The locket settled right over her heart, warm from his hands and heavy with all that history and trust. It felt an awful lot like she was finally home. "Thank you," she whispered. "Welcome to the family, Clara Carver." Clara Carver. She wasn't Clara Hawthorne anymore. Not that headstrong girl who disappointed all those high society folks in Boston. She was Clara Carver, a rancher's wife, partner to a man they called Wolf, a woman who chose the wild country over the city and felt more whole because of it. She touched the locket, feeling its solid weight, and realized she'd never owned jewelry that truly meant anything before. In Boston, her jewels were just to show off money. This was different. This was about family, legacy, and trust. This was home. That silver locket became Clara's good luck charm in the weeks that followed. It was a constant reminder she had chosen this life, and it had chosen her right back. She wore it every single day, tucked inside her work shirts, where it was cool against her skin during morning chores and got warmer through the day's hard work. Sometimes at meals, she would catch Luke looking at it. He would get a soft look on his face, one he never could put into words. But she did not need him to. The fact that he gave her his mother's most treasured possession said everything his quiet way could not. Then winter settled into Cedar Creek Valley with a meanness that made Boston's cold feel like a mild spring day. The temperature dropped so low that a bucket of water left outside would freeze solid in minutes. Snow came in waves, sometimes just a light dusting that melted before noon. Other times, it was a full-blown blizzard that buried the fences and trapped them inside for days. Clara learned to read the sky with the same focus she once gave Boston party lists, knowing that survival out here depended on guessing the weather's moods. During one particularly vicious storm, they were stuck in the cabin for 3 whole days straight. Clara worried the close quarters would feel suffocating, that Luke's silence would become too heavy to bear. But instead, she found a strange comfort in being snowed in together. They fell into a natural rhythm that did not need many words. Luke kept the fires burning while Clara managed their food, making every meal stretch to make sure it would last if the storm went on. They worked on their own chores in a comfortable silence, only speaking to point out the wind's direction or how heavy the snow was. Small, practical things that felt more personal than any poem. On the second night they were stuck, Clara was mending something by lamplight when Luke suddenly spoke up. "Tell me about your mother." Clara's needle stopped mid-stitch. Luke rarely asked such personal questions. He preferred to let things come out on their own time. His directness caught her completely by surprise. "Why?" she asked, not being defensive, just curious. "You mention her a good bit, in small ways. How she taught you to stitch up wounds, to read folks like you read the weather, to know when someone is bluffing. She sounds like more than the ghost you described." Luke set down the leather harness he was mending. "I want to know who she really was." Clara put her sewing aside. As the fire crackled against the storm, Clara started to mend more than just clothes. "Her name was Eleanor," she began. "My mother was brilliant, respectable, and educated, which was a rare thing. My father married her for that sparkle, then spent the next 28 years slowly snuffing it out. He'd do it with little cuts, dismissing her opinions in public until she just stopped talking altogether. She warned me not to make her mistakes, but I almost did. Boston society tried to drown me in that same silence." Luke watched her, his expression thoughtful. "My mother was the opposite. She never went quiet. When my father said women shouldn't have opinions on ranching, she laughed and told him she'd been at it since she was 12. A small smile touched his face. He never made that mistake again. "She would have liked you, Clara. You remind me of her," he said, his voice earnest, not in looks, but in the spine. That refusal to be made small. When the storm finally broke on the fourth day, leaving 3 feet of snow, Clara felt stronger than she ever had before. Was out of sight. Clara touched the locket at her throat. "She only showed her true self to me in our private moments. She taught me things my father would not have approved of, and she warned me not to make her same mistakes." "But you almost did," Luke observed. "You said that Boston society nearly shaped you the same way." "I tried to be what they wanted. I spent years trying." Clara picked her mending back up just to keep her hands busy. "But I could not manage it. Every time I forced myself to be quiet in a conversation, I felt like I was drowning. Every time I pretended to be less smart than I was, something deep inside me just screamed. I kept thinking about my mother and how she looked in her final years, like a faded photograph of her real self. I could not become that." Luke was silent for a moment, his gaze far away. "My mother was the opposite. Never quiet, never small. My father tried one time to tell her that women should not have opinions about managing a ranch, and she just laughed in his face. She told him she had been running that ranch since she was 12, and he would do well to listen to someone with a little more experience." A small smile crossed his face. "He never made that mistake again." "You loved her very much." "I did. Still do, I reckon, even though she is gone." Luke stood up, moving to add more wood to the fire. "She would have liked you. She would have appreciated that you are not afraid of work or silence. She would have respected that you left Boston rather than let it slowly snuff you out. I wish I could have met her." "Me too." Luke went back to his chair, but instead of getting back to his mending, he just sat there looking right at Clara. "You remind me of her in some ways. Not in your looks. She was tall, broad-shouldered, built for hard work. But it is the backbone, that refusal to be made small. It is the way you face problems head-on instead of hoping they fix themselves." Clara felt a warmth spread in her chest that had nothing to do with the fireplace. "That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." "It is just the truth." Luke's voice was so matter-of-fact, you would think he was talking about the weather, rather than giving her such a fine compliment. You are strong, Clara, stronger than you probably even know. The storm finally broke on the fourth day, leaving the whole valley buried under 3 feet of fresh snow. Digging out was going to be a monumental task. It was back-breaking work that lasted for days. Clara and Luke shoveled snow side by side, clearing paths so the animals could eat. Her arms and back were hollering in protest and the wind bit at her face, but she refused to quit. She just had to know, how in the world did you ever do this alone? Luke just leaned on his shovel. It took near a week. You being here makes all the difference. We're a team, Clara said, and Luke nodded. A partnership. That night, a long howl echoed from the ridge. It was Ghost, calling to his family. They're just celebrating the storm's end, Luke said quietly, looking out the window. Hunting will be easier now. Clara joined him, a little shiver running down her spine. Do you think he knows we're in here? Oh, Ghost knows, Luke said for a fact. He can tell you're different, that you belong here. The howling rose and fell, a wild and beautiful song in the dark. I used to think of them as monsters, Clara admitted softly, but they're just a family. Surviving together, Luke finished. Not so different from us, really. Clara realized he was right. They were their own little pack of two, learning to make it in this tough country. As the calendar turned, the work changed. Luke taught her how to read the cattle, to spot when one was ailing. She learned to see the difference between a cow that was just cold and one that was in real trouble. Then one morning they found one of her favorites, an old, gentle cow lying in the snow, clearly in a bad way. Luke looked over at her. Animals notice things people miss. Ghosts can probably tell you are more settled. He continued, that you belong here in a way the others never did. The howling grew louder. The sounds rose and fell in a way that seemed almost like a language. Clara found herself captivated. I used to be so scared of wolves, she admitted quietly. Back in Boston, they were just monsters in fairy tales. She trailed off, looking for the right words. But hearing them now, they are just family, Luke finished for her. Taking care of each other, surviving. Not so different from us. Not so different from us, Clara repeated, realizing it was true. She and Luke were their own small pack. They were a pack of two, learning how to survive together in this unforgiving but beautiful place. When January finally gave way to February, the daily work began to shift. The cattle needed more looking after. Their feed watched carefully to make sure they survived until spring. Clara was learning how to read the cattle, and one morning she found her favorite gentle cow down in the snow, in a world of trouble. After all the hard work was over, she was too worn out to even stand, but they had saved them both. Luke sat right by her and said, You did real good, Clara. Animals and Clara had grown mighty fond of that sweet-natured creature. She's Calvin way too early, Luke said, dropping to his knees in the snow. And bless her heart, the calf's coming in wrong. We have to help her, or we'll lose them both. Luke was already rolling up his sleeves, ready for the tough work ahead. Clara, I need you to hold her head and talk to her. Keep her calm for me. So Clara gripped the halter, talking soft and easy to the poor animal, whose eyes were wide with fright. This was a far cry from Boston, but she knew this cow's life depended on her. Luke worked with a steady hand, trying to turn the calf, while the cow cried out in pain. After what felt like a lifetime, Luke yelled, Got it! She can do the rest now. Minutes later, a small calf was born, but it lay perfectly still in the snow. Luke quickly cleared its nose and rubbed it down hard, urging it, Come on now, breathe. Suddenly, the little calf took a big, shaky breath, and its mama started licking it clean. They had done it. They had saved them both against all odds. You did real good, Clara, Luke said, his face tired but his eyes bright with victory. Most city folks would have panicked. Clara replied, Oh, I was panicking on the inside. Luke gave a real, honest-to-goodness laugh. Well, that's what courage is. It's being scared to death, he said, and doing what needs doing anyway. They watched the wobbly little calf try to stand, a new life there in the cold. It felt like a lesson about this new hard life she was learning to live. She's a special one, Clara said softly. She surely deserves a name. Luke looked over at her, his smile fading just a bit. I don't usually name them. It just makes it harder when... I was scared the entire time, she told him. He let out a big, honest laugh. Well, now, that is just called courage, doing the job when you are terrified. They sat there and watched the little calf wobble up on its shaky legs, a perfect sign of life pushing back against this hard country. To sit down beside her. His arms were a mess clean up to the elbows. The cold had turned his face a pale gray, but his eyes were shining with victory. That was tough going, Clara. Most folks would have lost their nerve. Oh, I was scared, all right. I just couldn't let myself stop. Luke let out a big, honest laugh that changed his whole face. Well, that's what courage is, being scared spitless, and doing what has to be done anyway. They just sat there together in the snow, watching that new little calf try to get up. Its little legs were all wobbly, and its mama kept giving it soft nudges. It was life, plain and simple, pushing right through the cold and the hardship, and all the danger out here. It seemed to capture everything Clara was learning about making a life on the frontier. What are you going to name her? Clara asked. Luke looked at her, a little taken aback. The calf, she's a special one coming into the world so hard, but she made it. She deserves a proper name. I don't rightly name 'em. Makes it tougher when... Luke trailed off when he saw the look on her face. Well, I reckon this one's an exception, Luke said. Watching the new calf, Clara simply said, let's call her Hope. Luke smiled. Hope. Right, Hope it is. They got the new mama and her baby settled warm in the barn. Back at the cabin, they were both bone-tired and filthy, running on nothing but nerve as Clara's hands kept shaking. First time? Luke asked gently, pouring her a whiskey she would normally never touch. The burning liquid steadied her right up. It gets more familiar, he told her, but you should know that cow would have died without you. You saved him, Clara. You. We saved them together, she answered. In that quiet moment, they both knew they were becoming a real team. Later that night, Clara thought about her hands. In Boston, they just poured tea. Here in Wyoming, they had saved a life. She whispered a thank you to her mother, Eleanor Blackwood, who taught her that real strength mattered more than just being decorative. In the weeks that followed, they fell into an easy rhythm, working together like they had been doing it their whole lives. Even their neighbor, Martha Zimmerman, pulled Clara aside and said, "You are still here. Good. That man needs someone." "Listen to me," he said later. "That cow and calf are alive because of you. We saved them. Together." In that moment, they knew they were a real team. Without your help, that little calf wouldn't be here. You saved them, Clara, not me, you. We saved them together. Together, Luke agreed. In that moment, a quiet understanding passed between them. They both knew they were becoming something more than just two folks sharing a piece of land. They were turning into a real team, a partnership that made each of them stronger. That night, Clara thought about hope and how helping each other was the only way to make it. And she thought about Luke's strong, capable hands. Sometimes meant pulling each other through the toughest times. She thought about Luke's hands, how strong and sure they were, and gentle, for all their size. She remembered her own hands back in Boston, made for pouring tea, not saving a life. Here, her hands had purpose. Here, they truly mattered. She gave a quiet thank you to her mother, Eleanor Blackwood. Her mother taught her that being strong was a sight more important than just being pretty. The next few weeks, things just fell into a comfortable rhythm out on the ranch. Clara and Luke started moving around each other like they had been partners for years. They seemed to know what the other needed before a word was ever spoken. He would reach for a tool, and she would already have it waiting in her hand for him. She would start on a chore, only to find he had already done the hard part for her. They were learning each other, building something stronger than either one of them could be alone. The other ranchers started to notice, especially when they rode over to the Zimmerman's place. After a bad storm, they went to check on the older couple. Martha Zimmerman pulled Clara aside while the men talked about the price of cattle. "Well, I'll be. You're still here," Martha said, her face full of surprise and a little bit of respect. "None of Luke's other brides ever made it this far along." Clara just smiled and said, "I am not going anywhere." "Good," Martha nodded. "That man needs a woman with some backbone." She told Clara that Luke's mother, Catherine, had been her dearest friend. Catherine always worried her son would end up by himself because he was not a man for fancy words. He shouldn't have to put on a show, Clara said. Martha agreed. But most women want the sweet talk even when there is real work to be done. Martha sighed. Catherine always said Luke needed someone who understands love is in what a person does. Someone who would notice how he sharpens her knives without a word or saddles her horse first, or how he would save the last spoonful of sugar for her, even if he wanted it himself. And just like that, Clara thought of all the little things Luke did without any fuss. He always kept the fire going so she would wake up to a warm cabin. He made sure the coffee was hot for her. They were just quiet little acts of kindness, woven right into their everyday lives. I see it, Clara said, her voice soft. I see exactly how he shows he cares. Martha patted her hand. Then you are smarter than the others. You hold on to that man, you hear? That conversation stayed with Clara all the way home through the cold afternoon. She looked over at Luke, riding steady beside her against the snowy land. What she felt was not some storybook romance, but something much deeper. It was respect. It was trust. Love that's built on what a person can do, not just what they say. Martha says you take right after your mother, Clara said, breaking the comfortable quiet. In what way? She asked. You show your heart with your hands, not with your words. Luke was quiet for a long moment, the horses just walking on. Words are cheap, he finally said. Actions, they cost something. If I'm going to care for somebody, I want it to mean something. I want them to know I'm making their road easier, even if it makes mine harder. Like getting up early to start the fire so I wake up warm. He glanced over, surprised. You notice that? I notice every little thing you do, Luke. The way you leave me the last bit of butter. The way you always take the tough piece of meat so I get the tender one. And how you mended my good skirt when I tore it, even though you claim you're no good at sewing. Clara smiled. You show you care in 100 small ways every day. A person would have to be blind not to see it. Luke's hands tightened up on the reins, and Clara saw the muscle working in his jaw. When he spoke, his voice was thick with feeling. No one's ever seen that before. The others, they wanted a big show, bouquets of flowers when there were no flowers to pick. They wanted poetry, and I don't know the first thing about poems. They wanted me to say I loved them when that wasn't what it was. But the small things, the everyday things, that didn't matter to them. She said softly, they mattered to me. Clara nudged her horse Rosie closer till her leg brushed right up against Luke's. They matter more than all the poetry in the whole wide world. They rode the rest of the way home in silence, but it was a new kind of quiet. It was full of understanding and a feeling that neither of them had a name for, but they both saw it in each other. That evening, Luke did something he'd never done. After supper was cleared and the chores were all done, he stood up from his chair and held out his hand to Clara. Dance with me, he said. Clara blinked, surprised. There is no music. He said, we do not need music. I just need to hold you. His voice was a little rough, almost shy, but his hand was steady. You are the one who said actions matter more than words. This is me showing you what I do not know how to say. Clara took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. There was no music, no dance floor, just the worn wooden planks, the crackle of the fire, and two people learning how to move together. Luke's hand settled at her waist, big and warm. Clara's hand rested on his shoulder, feeling the solid muscle under his shirt. They swayed in the lamplight, not really dancing, more like just holding each other and moving soft and slow to a rhythm only their hearts could hear. I am not good at this, Luke murmured. You are perfect, Clara whispered back. They moved as one while the snow began to fall outside, as the wind sang a low song around the cabin, and the fire burned down to warm coals. No words were spoken because none were needed. They were talking in a much deeper way. They were learning to trust, letting their guards down, one brick at a time. When they finally stepped apart, Luke did not let go of her hand right away. He stood looking down at her, and his face held something so vulnerable and unsure. Clara, he started but stopped, fighting for words that never came easy to him. What I mean is, Clara rose up on her toes and kissed his cheek, just a soft press of her lips on his rough beard. I know, I feel it too. Relief washed over his face. You do? She nodded. Yes. We do not need to name it or rush it. We just need to let it be. Let's just build something real. Then he pulled her in close. She felt safe, like she was home. This was more real than Boston. They stood together by the embers. Their love was built on respect. Finally, they reluctantly parted. A wall between them was gone. They whispered their goodnights. Thank you, she said, for showing me. For understanding, he replied. From her loft, she heard him settle in. Those familiar sounds meant more now. They were finally true partners. Lying in the dark, Clara smiled. She had traveled 1,800 miles expecting nothing at all, and here she had found everything. But March brought a brutal late-season storm. The temperature dropped hard and stayed below zero. The cattle suffered for it. Despite all their hard work, they lost 2 head to the cold. Luke took it personally. He blamed himself as they dug for hours in the frozen ground. I should have moved them sooner, he said, his voice hollow with guilt. You cannot control the weather, Luke. We did everything a person could do. Clara ached from the cold but stayed right beside him. Sometimes loss just happens. Catherine would have seen it coming, he insisted, his voice low. Stop that, Clara said firmly. You are building this place your own way. She drove her shovel into the dirt. The ranch is fine. We are fine. Losing 2 is terrible, but this is not going to break us. We will recover. Luke finally looked at her, his eyes raw from the wind. I know, but it feels like failure. Failure is giving up, she said, moving closer to him. This is just a hard setback. She grabbed his arm. We are partners. I am here to help you carry the load. So please let me help you. At that, something inside him finally broke. He pulled her close, burying his face in her shoulder as he started to shake. She did not know if it was cold or grief, and it did not matter. She just held on to him. Later that night, for the very first time, Luke climbed the ladder up to her loft. He hesitated. Can I? Come here, she whispered, pulling back the warm quilt. Luke took off his boots and lay down. She wrapped them both in the old blanket. He was warm and solid beside her, but he was still trembling just a little. She felt his breathing finally slow down. Thank you, he whispered in the darkness. For what? She asked. For letting me be weak. You are not weak, Luke. You are human. She found his hand under the covers and held it tight. Besides, we are partners. That means I get to see all of you, not just all the strong parts. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. I am falling in love with you, Clara. I will probably mess it up 100 different ways, but it is happening anyway. Her heart knew it was true. I am falling in love with you too, Luke. The real you. The man who works so hard and struggles and cares so much. They knew that being their true selves was everything. They lay together while the winter wind howled. 2 souls, always told they were too much, found they were just right for each other. At dawn, Luke finally asked, Is me being here all right? More than all right, she said, but we ought to talk. Back in Boston, this kind of plain talk was scandalous. But out here, it was honest. I want you here always. Not for protection, but because this is a partnership. Pure relief washed right over Luke's face. I have wanted the same for weeks, he admitted. Then it is settled. A soft kiss sealed their pact. It was their first real kiss, full of quiet promise. They both smiled. Time for chores, Luke whispered. But neither one of them moved from the warm quilts. They just stayed a moment, learning to be together. All through the day, his tender looks warmed her heart. When their hands brushed, the feeling was precious. They were not building a fairy tale romance. This was something stronger, forged in hardship. That evening, Luke brought his bedroll up to the loft. The space was small, but they made it work together. Making things work was what they did best. Clara thought about the telegram that started it all. It called her too stubborn, as if that were a flaw. She smiled. That stubborn woman had found her home. She found a man who needed her fire and her fight. What has you smiling? He asked, pulling her close. Just thinking how Mr. Henderson called me stubborn. Luke chuckled. Henderson is a fool. Your fire is our blessing. Our ranch, she corrected him softly. They listened to the wolves sing. They knew this was worth keeping. She fell asleep safe in his arms. She finally understood what safety was. It was about trust and partnership. Spring slowly pushed out the winter. The whole ranch was a muddy mess. But little green shoots pushed through. Life was finally coming back. They worked from sunup to sundown. The fences needed a lot of mending. The old barn needed repairs too. They moved the cattle to new pasture. It was hard, bone-tiring work. She was always too tired to dream. But it was a real good feeling, seeing the ranch come alive with their hard work. They could see the results of their labor. Every fixed fence and cared-for animal was an investment in their future. One morning in early April, Clara was in her garden plot. She was breaking up the hard soil, getting ready to plant vegetables for the winter. Luke had ridden out to check the east fence, leaving her alone with her work. Clara was so focused on her digging, she did not hear the horse until it was right up on her. She straightened up, shading her eyes. She knew that rider right away. It was Mrs. Fletcher, looking a bit more worn than before. She pulled her mare to a stop. "Mrs. Carver," the older woman said, her voice full of both surprise and approval. "Or is it still Miss Hawthorne?" "Mrs. Carver is just fine." Clara pulled off her work gloves. Her hands looked different now, strong and capable. "This is a surprise visit. Is everything all right?" "On the contrary, I am just checking on the matches I made over the winter." Mrs. Fletcher got down from her horse with a groan. "I will be honest with you. I didn't expect to find you still here. Luke's reputation suggested you'd be gone by March." "Come on inside," I said. "Coffee's hot." At the table, Mrs. Fletcher studied Clara. "You look stronger," she observed. "This place changes you," Clara said. "It helps you find who you really are." "And Luke, is he treating you well?" "He is an honest and good partner." "You were right about him," Clara admitted. "But does that make you happy?" Clara thought hard about that word. Happy felt like too simple a word. "I'm building a real life here, and that is everything to me." Mrs. Fletcher nodded with clear respect. "You're the second bride to last this long. Luke's mother stayed for 40 years. Then I need to understand why. Why send others who would surely fail?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I hoped one of them would be strong. And Luke, he never gave up hope. He kept asking. I could not deny him. Hope has to start somewhere, child. And besides, I was right about you. You are here now. That was worth it all." Just then, Luke came in the door. He was muddy, tired, and surprised. "Miguel, just checking on my matches," she said. "This one is working out very well." "Clara's different," Luke said. "She does not try to fix me." Mrs. Fletcher just smiled, saying the whole territory was talking about the wolf of Cedar Creek finally finding a bride. Luke said he only cared what Clara thought and thanked the woman for making the best match of her life. After she left, he pulled Clara close on the porch and asked, "Are we really happy, like you said?" "Happier than I have ever been," she told him, "because this life is honest, and you let me be myself." She kissed him then, explaining, "It's because we're building something together that neither of us could alone." He held her tight and finally said, "I love you, Clara." And she whispered right back, "I love the real you too." There was a true partnership, built on choosing each other every day as the green grass grew thick in the pastures. Wildflowers bloomed, and her garden pushed up from the dark soil, promising a future full of abundance. Luke taught her to ride proper and read the trails, showing her the difference between deer paths and cattle tracks. And that wild, lonely land finally stopped feeling so frightening and started feeling just like home. "This life ain't easy at all." "So why stay?" he asked. "Because it's honest. You are honest. Because out here I can finally be my true self, not who others expect me to be." Clara stood on her toes to kiss him. It tasted like coffee and the morning's hard work. "I chose this life, and you chose me. We're building something special together. Something neither of us could ever build alone." Luke held her close, burying his face in her hair. "I love you, Clara Carver. I mean that with everything I have. You said it perfectly. And I love you too, the real you, the man who shows his love through his actions and who needs me just as much as I need him." They held each other as the warm spring sun shone on their backs. The whole valley around them felt alive with promise. This was a true partnership. It was two people choosing each other every single day, doing the hard work to build a life. As April turned to May, the ranch looked like a new place. The pastures were thick and green. Wildflowers were blooming everywhere, and the creek ran high with melted snow, singing its song. Clara's garden was thriving under her care, with neat little rows of vegetables pushing through. The cattle grew fat on the new grass. Even Hope, the calf born in the snow, was now sturdy. She followed her mother on strong, confident legs. Luke began to teach Clara how to really ride, taking her on long trips across their land. He even taught her how to read animal tracks. She learned to read the land's secrets, from deer trails to the tracks of predators. That wild country soon felt familiar, not frightening. Clara finally understood why Luke loved this place so much he'd rather be lonely here. She saw why this rugged land felt more like home than any town ever could. One late May evening, they rode on up to that high meadow Luke had mentioned. It was a secret valley, just covered in wildflowers. Luke told her, "This is where I come to think." It was the place where everything just made sense to him. Clara walked through a sea of colorful blossoms. She whispered that it was absolutely perfect. He came and stood beside her, taking her hand in his. He said he needed to talk about their future together. Clara's heart started to beat a little bit faster. He told her their marriage felt real now, more than just practical. Then he looked her in the eye and said he wanted children. He wanted to build a family that would last for generations here. Tears of pure happiness filled Clara's eyes. She admitted she wanted that very same thing too, to raise strong children who could handle anything. Luke gently warned her it would not be an easy life. Raising kids so far from everything would be a challenge. But Clara was sure because they would do it together. She reminded him they were partners in all of this. She said their children would be strong enough to thrive. Luke pulled her into a warm embrace right there. They made promises about the life they were determined to build. Their future was a choice they were making together. After a moment, Clara asked when they should start. He thought they should give it one more year, to be smart. His warm hand rested gently on her stomach. Just knowing they both wanted it gave all their hard work more meaning. They rode for home as the sunset painted the sky. Hearing the wolves, Clara added her own happy call to theirs. Luke joined in, and together they made their own wild music. Valley that they were here to stay, building a life that was meant to last. They would not be driven away by hardship or loneliness. Summer brought a new kind of challenge with its blistering heat. The work changed to keeping the garden watered and the pastures green. They had to watch for pests and predators, always testing their defenses. Luke taught Clara how to handle a rifle, and she took to it like a natural. They practiced in the evenings, and soon her aim was even better than his. This earned his genuine admiration, not a bit of wounded pride. "You're better than me," he admitted. "You have steadier hands and a better eye. If we ever have real trouble, you should take the shot." Clara noted that most men would feel threatened by that. "Well, I am not most men," Luke said. "Your skill makes us stronger together." That got into a partnership. As he cleaned the rifles, he added, "Besides, my pride is not so fragile. A man has to know when someone does something better. That is how you learn." It was in these small moments that Clara knew she loved this honest man. He celebrated her strengths instead of feeling small because of them. By July, the neighbors started stopping by more often. It was not just Henderson or the Zimmermans, but other ranching families too. They were all curious about the woman who had finally settled the wolf of Cedar Creek. Clara would serve them coffee and fresh bread on the porch. The weathered men and women looked her over carefully, like they were judging good livestock. It seemed she passed their test because the visits became more friendly and relaxed. The women shared tips on preserving food, and the men talked cattle prices. Clara joined in both conversations, and her opinions were always respected. They saw she was competent, and they did not resent her for it. "You are good with them," Luke said one afternoon. "Better than I ever was. They truly like you." "They respect us," Clara corrected while washing the dishes, "and that is more valuable. They see we are building something real here, something that will not fail. That makes us trustworthy, which matters more than being liked out here." "Still," he said, "you have woven us into this community in 6 months. It took me 5 years to get nowhere." Clara turned to him. That is because you never needed the community like I do. You are fine on your own, but I need some connection with other folks. Beyond just the two of us. Not much, but some. Does that bother you that I'm comfortable alone? No, because you are not demanding I match your comfort level. You are letting me build the connections I need while still keeping the quiet you prefer. That is a compromise. That is a real partnership. Clara moved to stand beside him. They watched the last of the neighbors drive away. We do not have to be identical to work well together. We just have to respect each other's needs. Luke pulled her in close, his arms strong around her waist. You make it sound so simple. She smiled and said, it is simple. Folks just like to make things complicated. As the summer got hotter, Clara found out she was pregnant. The signs were small. She felt a deep weariness, a little sickness in the mornings, and some smells bothered her. By August, there was no denying the little life that was growing inside of her. She sat at the kitchen table one morning, her hands pressed against her still flat belly. She watched through the window as Luke walked in from the barn. He moved with an easy confidence. She felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly took her breath away. That good man was going to be the father of her child, their baby. You look mighty serious, Luke said, washing his hands before sitting with her. Is something wrong? Something is very right, she said. Clara took his hand and pressed it to her stomach. I am pregnant. His eyes went wide with a feeling somewhere between pure joy and terror. Are you sure? I am as sure as I can be. All the signs are pointing to it. Yes, I am sure. For a second, Luke just stared. Then he was pulling Clara into a hug, so gentle and careful. His face was buried in her hair, and his shoulders shook with emotion. We are going to be parents, he whispered. We are actually going to have a family. Yes, we are. Clara held him just as tight. Are you ready for this? She asked him. No, not one bit. I am terrified, actually. Luke pulled back to look her in the eyes. But we will figure it out together. Partnership, right? Partnership, Clara agreed, and she kissed him to seal their promise. The pregnancy went along smoothly as the seasons changed into fall. Her body changed slowly. Luke became so protective it was almost comical, trying to stop her from doing any real work. Clara had to firmly tell him that being pregnant was not some kind of sickness. They compromised, just like they always did. She took on the lighter work, like the garden and the chickens. Luke handled all the heavy labor, but he still taught Clara everything she would need to know. He wanted her to be prepared in case she ever had to manage things all by herself. Together, they fixed up the loft for the baby, building a small cradle from cedar wood. Winter came back around, but this time Clara knew what to do. Even with a baby on the way, she had learned to work smarter, not harder. On a bitter cold night in January, almost 1 year to the day she arrived, her time came. Luke rode like the wind to fetch Martha Zimmerman, the only midwife in the territory. The pain was worse than anything she could have imagined, testing her stubborn will. But Clara had learned that strength was just refusing to let the pain stop you. With one final tremendous push, a healthy baby's cry filled the small cabin. It's a girl, Martha announced, wrapping the perfect infant in a clean blanket. Tears streamed down Luke's face as he placed their tiny daughter into Clara's arms. The baby gripped his finger with surprising strength, and Luke chuckled. She's got your stubbornness already. They named her Catherine after Luke's mother and Eleanor for Clara's. They called her Katie, and she had her father's coloring and her mother's determined stare. She's going to be a handful, Martha predicted with a grin. Good, Clara said, exhausted but smiling. Stubborn women survive. Stubborn women build things that last. In Luke's eyes, she saw the family they had built together, filled with respect and honest love. As the winter snows melted into spring, Clara tackled motherhood with that same fierce spirit. Katie was a demanding child, but Clara was more than ready for the challenge. She's perfect, Clara whispered. She's ours, Luke corrected, his voice thick with emotion. Little Katie was the living proof of a life they had built from scratch. She represented hope, endurance, and the kind of love that could weather any storm. Their little family was complete, a bright new chapter starting at Cedar Creek. She will be a handful, Martha predicted, watching Katie's fierce grip on Luke's finger. Got that look about her. The stubborn ones always do. Luke met her eyes over their daughter's head, and Clara saw everything they'd built. They had found the kind of family neither believed was possible. As winter slowly gave way to spring again, Clara adjusted to her new life. Katie was demanding, feeding constantly, and sleeping in short bursts. But Clara faced it all with the same quiet determination she brought to everything else. It seemed near impossible. But Luke stepped up to being a daddy with a surprising grace, taking on more than his share of the ranch work, while Clara put her mind to keeping their little girl alive and healthy. They worked their way through the months in a tired harmony, stealing quiet moments between endless baby chores and the work that had to be done. Luke would hold Katie while Clara was fixing supper, or Clara would strap the baby to her back for the lighter chores. Or they'd just sit together in the evening with Katie sleeping between them, too bone-tired to talk, but happy in their shared quiet. On a warm day that May, when Katie was 4 months old and starting to show her own little personality, all fiery and curious and completely sure of her place in the world, Clara carried her out to the high meadow. Luke had ridden on ahead with supplies for a rare day of rest, and Clara found him sitting there among the wildflowers, just watching the valley that was their kingdom. "Well, there y'all are," he said, standing up to take Katie from her arms. The baby let out a giggle for her daddy, her small hands reaching for his beard. "I was starting to think you'd gotten lost." "Just took my sweet time. I wanted Katie to see everything, the creek, the cattle, the mountains." Clara settled down beside him, taking Katie back as the little one began to fuss for a meal. She wanted her to understand this is all hers one day. All of this, the land, the work, the life we're building. Luke watched Clara nurse their daughter, and the look on his face was so tender it made Clara's heart ache in a good way. "You know what today is?" she asked. "Should I? It's been 1 whole year since we got hitched. Officially, legally, by Judge Morrison." Luke pulled out a small bundle wrapped up in cloth. "I made something for you. Wasn't sure I'd get it finished, but I did." Clara unwrapped the cloth with one hand, revealing a wooden box carved with beautiful designs of wildflowers and mountains, and even wolves and horses, and tiny little figures she recognized as the three of them. The work he put into it was just extraordinary. Every little detail was carved just so, in wood that was sanded smooth as silk. "Luke, this is just beautiful. When did you ever find the time for this? In the evenings after you fell asleep?" "It took me a few months." He looked almost shy saying it. "I wanted to make something that would last. Something that showed how I felt, seeing as I'm not much good with words. Something Katie could have someday, to remember where she came from." Clara traced the little carved people with her free hand, her eyes getting misty with tears. "This is the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for me, more than any flowers or pretty poems in the world. Because it's real. It's honest." Luke leaned over to kiss her forehead, then little Katie's. "Just like us. Just like everything we've built." They sat there together in that meadow full of flowers. Clara and Luke and Katie, the little family that never should have worked, but somehow did. The mail-order bride they sent packing for being too stubborn. The cowboy they all called Wolf because he liked being alone more than he liked pretending. The little baby born in winter who'd grow up strong and capable, and completely certain of her own worth. Down below them, Cedar Creek Ranch spread out across the valley, its fences mended, buildings looked after, cattle grazing peacefully, and chickens scratching in the yard. A whole year of their hard work, visible proof that a partnership could build something that would stand the test of time. And beyond their ranch, the endless Wyoming wild, a place that was harsh and beautiful and didn't forgive, demanding everything from the folks who chose to live in it. "Do you ever have second thoughts?" Clara asked in a low voice. "About marrying me? A wife who speaks her mind and is not just here to look pretty?" Luke let out a soft, genuine laugh. "That telegram said you were too stubborn. It said, that fire of yours made you unfit for marriage. But Clara, that fire is exactly what I needed, what this place needed, and what little Katie is going to need growing up." He took her hand, weaving his scarred, work-worn fingers with hers. "I do not regret a single thing. You are the best thing that ever happened to the Cedar Creek Ranch." "No, we are the best thing," Clara corrected gently. "All three of us, as a team. A partnership." "A partnership," Luke agreed. Little Katie finished her meal and let out a happy little burp which made her mama and daddy laugh. Clara nestled the baby on her shoulder, looking out over the valley they called home. Just a year ago, she was scared and had nowhere to turn, cast aside like some unwanted cargo. She wondered if she had made a terrible mistake coming to Wyoming territory. But now she sat in a field full of wildflowers, with a husband who showed his love with a whittling knife, and a daughter who would learn strength from both of them. And Clara finally understood that sometimes the best things in life show up looking like a closed door. Mr. Henderson sent her packing for being too stubborn. But Luke Carver said that fire was exactly what he needed. And somewhere between those two opinions, Clara found more than just a way to get by. She found where she truly belonged. She found a real partner and a reason for being, with good hard work and true love. A life built on what you can do, not how you act. The wolves started their evening song up on the northern ridge. Ghost and his pack were still roaming the territory, still getting by together as a family. Clara could not help but smile, seeing a bit of herself in them. They were all just trying to make it in a tough land, all building something worth protecting, all knowing that real strength comes from standing together, not standing alone. "Tell me something," Luke said, as the sunset painted the whole sky in unbelievable colors. "If you could go right back to that train station in January, knowing everything that was coming, all the hard work, the bitter cold, the loneliness, all the fights, would you still climb up on that wagon with me?" Clara did not have to think twice. In a heartbeat, every single time, because this, she said, waving her hand toward the ranch, to Katie and to Luke himself. "This right here is real. This matters. This is the very thing I traveled 1,800 miles to find." And what is that? A place where a headstrong woman is appreciated instead of pushed aside. Where a fire inside you is needed, not put out. A place where being partners means you build each other up instead of one person having to make themselves smaller. Clara leaned her head on Luke's shoulder, feeling his steady warmth. A place where I can finally just breathe. They sat there together while the sun went down. The wolves sang their songs, and the first stars started to pop out in the darkened sky. Three souls who found each other against all the odds. They built something special and precious out of good, honest work and true love. They took feeling unwanted and lonely and turned it all into family and a reason to be. The mail-order bride, the one sent back for being too stubborn, had found herself a cowboy who said her fire was just what he was looking for. And together they built something that would last down the line for generations, not because it was ever easy, but because their love was real. They had chosen each other, just as they were. Claire knew some fires were not meant to be tamed, some were meant to burn bright and fierce. She was that fire. And Luke was the steady structure that held it safely. Their daughter Katie would learn a powerful lesson, that being too much is never a flaw. As night settled, she listened to her family breathe. She finally had what her mother never achieved. Not just getting by, but a life worth living. The stubborn fire Boston tried to put out was now burning brighter than it ever had. And she would teach her daughter to never be made small. Because the woman everyone calls too stubborn is exactly stubborn enough to build a life that lasts forever.